Main courses: Advanced Mathematics, Theoretical Mechanics, Fluid Mechanics, Computer Principles and Applications, Computer Languages and Programming, Dynamic Meteorology, Principles of Meteorology, Chinese Weather, Statistical Forecasting, Medium to Long-Term Weather Forecasting, Numerical Forecasting, etc. Elective courses: Atmospheric Circulation, Diagnostic Analysis of Meteorology, Heavy Rain and Mesoscale Weather, Thunderstorm Forecasting and Prevention, Tropical Weather, Climate Change and Short-Term Climate Prediction, Radar Meteorology and Satellite Meteorology, Air Pollution and Urban Climate, Plateau Weather, Atmosphere-Ocean Interaction, etc. 5 days ago, I handled all of Jelly's belongings and came to this southern city, 1,000 miles away, to attend university. When I closed the now empty door of my home for the last time, I knew that I had left my childhood and youth there forever. From now on, I would become a machine with a single purpose. Looking at this list of courses that would occupy my 4 years of college life, I felt somewhat disappointed. Most of the content was unnecessary for me, and some of the things I needed most, like electromagnetism and plasma physics, weren't on the list. I knew I might have chosen the wrong major and should have gone for physics instead of atmospheric science. From then on, I buried myself in the library, spending nearly all my time on mathematics, electromagnetism, fluid mechanics, and plasma physics. I only attended classes related to these subjects, skipping the others. The colorful university life had nothing to do with me, and I wasn't interested. Every night, I returned to the dormitory around 1 or 2 a.m., listening to one roommate murmur his girlfriend's name in his sleep, realizing there was another kind of life. One night, after midnight, I looked up from the thick partial differential equations, thinking I was the only one left in the reading room designed for night study students. But I saw a beautiful girl named Dai Lin from my class sitting across from me, with no book in front of her, just resting her head on her hands and staring at me. Even for her many admirers, her gaze wouldn't have been intoxicating. It was the look of someone spotting a spy in their ranks, a gaze at an outsider. I didn't know how long she had been looking at me that way. "You're quite special. I can tell you're not a bookworm. You have a very strong sense of purpose," she said. "Yeah? Don't you all have a purpose?" I asked casually. Maybe I was the only guy in the class who hadn't spoken to her. "Our purposes are vague. But you're looking for something very specific. You've got a good eye," I said coldly, packing my bag and standing up. I was the only one who didn't need to constantly show myself to them, so I felt a sense of superiority. "What are you looking for?" she called after me as I reached the door. "You wouldn't be interested." I walked away without looking back. Outside, in the quiet autumn night, I gazed at the starry sky. It seemed as if I could hear my parents' voices. The key to a wonderful life is what you can get obsessed with. I now truly understood the correctness of that statement. My life was like a speeding cannonball, with nothing but the desire for that explosion at the moment of reaching the target. This goal was entirely non-utilitarian. Achieving it would signify the end of life. I didn't know why I had to go there. I just wanted to, and that was enough. It was the most primal human impulse. Oddly, to this day, I hadn't even looked up any information about it. The relationship between it and me was like 2 nights preparing for a lifetime duel. When I wasn't ready, I neither sought it out nor thought about it. 3 semesters flew by. This period felt seamless to me, uninterrupted by holidays. Without a home, I spent all my breaks at school. Living alone in an empty dormitory, I didn't feel lonely at all. Only on New Year's Eve, hearing the sound of fireworks outside, did I think a little about the life before it came into my world, a life that now seemed distant. During these nights, in the unheated dorm, the cold made my dreams especially vivid. I had thought my parents would appear in my dreams that night, but they didn't. I remember an Indian legend where a king's beloved queen dies, and he decides to build a lavish tomb for her. He spent most of his life building it, and when the tomb was finished, he looked at the queen's coffin placed at the center and said, "This thing looks out of place here. Move it away." In my heart, my parents had already gone far away. Now, it was all about it. But what happened next complicated my once simple world even further. The summer vacation of my sophomore year, I went home to rent out the old house to cover my future tuition and living expenses. It was already dark when I returned home, I fumbled with the lock and pushed the door open. After turning on the light, I saw everything familiar. The table that had held my birthday cake on that stormy night was still in the center of the room, and the 3 chairs were still placed around it, as if I had just left yesterday. I sat down wearily on the sofa, taking in my home, feeling that something was off. This feeling was vague at first, but then grew more pronounced, like a hidden reef appearing sporadically on a foggy voyage, forcing me to confront it. Finally, I found the source of this feeling. It seemed like I had just left yesterday. I looked carefully at the tabletop. There was a thin layer of dust on it, but considering the 2 years since I had left, this dust was indeed too thin. My face was covered in sweat and dust, so I went to the bathroom to wash my face. After turning on the light, I saw a clear reflection of myself in the mirror. Yes, it was too clear. The mirror shouldn't be this clean. I clearly remember one summer vacation during elementary school when my parents and I went on a trip. After just a week, I came back and drew a little person on the dusty mirror with my finger. Now I used my finger to draw a few strokes on the mirror's surface, but nothing appeared. I turned on the faucet. The water from the pipes, which had been turned off for 2 years, should have been rusty, but the water that came out was crystal clear. After washing my face and returning to the living room, I noticed something else. 2 years ago, when I left for the last time, I took a quick look around the room before closing the door, afraid I had forgotten something. I saw my glass on the table and thought about going back to turn it upside down to avoid dust falling into it. But with the luggage on my shoulder, going back in would have been troublesome, so I dismissed the idea. I remember this detail very clearly, but now, the glass on the table was upside down. At this moment, the neighbors, seeing the lights, came in and warmly said the things one should say to an orphan going to college. They also promised to handle renting out the house for me, and if I couldn't come back after graduation, they would help sell it at a good price. It seems cleaner than when I left, I casually remarked when talking about the changes over the past 2 years. Cleaner? What's wrong with your eyesight? The thermal power plant near the distillery started operating last year, and now there's twice as much dust as when you left. Hey, where in the world could possibly get cleaner? I looked at the tabletop with only a thin layer of dust, but I said nothing. When they were leaving, I couldn't help but ask if any of them had the key to my house. The neighbors looked at each other in surprise, and all assured me they didn't. I believed them because there were 5 keys to my house in total, and 3 were still intact. I took one with me when I left 2 years ago, and it is now with me at my distant university dormitory. After the neighbors left, I checked all the windows. They were securely closed, with no signs of being tampered with. There were also 2 other house keys that my parents had, but that night, they were melted. I can't forget how I found those 2 irregularly shaped pieces of metal among my parents' ashes, 2 strings of keys melted and solidified. They are now in my dormitory 1,000 miles away as a memorial to that incredible energy. I sat for a while and began to pack things that I intended to either store elsewhere or take away after the house was rented. I first packed my father's watercolor paintings. They were among the few things in this room that I truly wanted to keep. I first took down the few hanging on the walls, then took out those in the cabinet. I tried to find all of the paintings and put them together into a cardboard box. Finally, I saw one more painting on the bottom shelf of the bookshelf. It was face down, so I hadn't noticed it before. Before putting it into the box, I glanced at the painting, and my eyes were instantly glued to it. It was a landscape painting depicting the view from our house's entrance. The scenery around here was dull and boring. A few gray 4-story-old buildings, a few rows of poplar trees looking lifeless because they were covered in dust. My father, an amateur painter, was lazy and rarely went out to sketch. He would always tirelessly paint these grayish surroundings, saying there was no dull scenery, only mediocre painters. And he was indeed one such painter. These dull sceneries became even more lifeless under his uninspired brush, accurately reflecting the everyday life of this gloomy northern city. The painting in my hand was one of those, similar to many others in the box, nothing particularly striking. But I noticed something in the painting, a water tower. It was slightly more colorful than the surrounding old buildings, like a tall morning glory. This wasn't unusual either. The water tower existed outside. I looked up at the window, and saw its tall silhouette against the city's lights. Except, this water tower was completed after I got into university. When I left 2 years ago, it was only half built among the scaffolding. I shivered all over, and the painting slipped from my hands to the floor. On this midsummer night, it seemed like a chill filled the house. I shoved the painting into the box and tightly closed the lid. I turned around to pack other things, trying to focus on what I was doing, but my mind felt like an iron needle suspended by a fine thread, and the box was a strong magnet. I could force the needle to point elsewhere, but as soon as my effort relaxed, the needle would immediately be drawn back to it. It started raining outside, the raindrops tapping lightly on the window. I kept thinking the sound was coming from the box. Eventually, I couldn't stand it anymore. I quickly walked over to the box, opened it, took out the painting, and carefully turned it face down. I took it to the bathroom, pulled out a lighter, and lit one corner. When the painting was a third burnt, I couldn't resist flipping it over. The water tower on the painting appeared even more lifelike, as if it were about to pop out of the paper. I watched the flames consume it. The watercolor used for painting it was scorched, and the flame took on a strange and dazzling color. I threw the nearly burnt-out painting into the sink, watched it burn up, and then turned on the faucet to wash away the ashes. After turning off the water, my gaze fell to the sink's edge, where I noticed something I hadn't seen while washing my face earlier. A few strands of hair, very long hair. Some were completely white, blending almost seamlessly with the sink surface. Others were half white. It was these black parts that caught my eye. They couldn't have been left by me 2 years ago. I've never had such long hair, nor gray hair. I gently picked up one of the half-black, half-white strands. Pull out one, and 7 will grow. I tossed the hair away as if it were scalding. The strand drifted slowly through the air, leaving a trail. This trail consisted of many fleeting images of the hair itself, as if my visual retention time had extended. The hair didn't fall back to the sink. It disappeared midway in the air. I looked at the other hairs on the edge of the sink, and they, too, vanished without a trace. I ran my head under the faucet for a long time and then returned to the living room, sitting numbly on the sofa, listening to the rain outside. It was raining heavily, a downpour, but there was no thunder or lightning. The rain hitting the window sounded like one or many people whispering, as if reminding me of something. The longer I listened, the more clearly I could make out the whisper's content, repeating over and over, sounding more and more real. There was thunder that day, there was thunder that day, there was thunder that day. Again, I sat at home through a night of heavy rain until dawn, then left the house once more in a daze. I knew I had left something here forever and that I would never return. Ball lightning, I have to face it because after the semester starts, the atmospheric electricity course will begin. The course on atmospheric electricity was taught by an associate professor named Zhang Bin. This man was around 50 years old, not too tall or short, with glasses that weren't too thick or thin, and spoke in a voice that wasn't too loud or soft. His lectures were neither good nor bad. In short, he was an average person. The only unique thing about him was his slightly lame leg, though it wasn't noticeable if you didn't pay attention. That afternoon after class, only Zhang Bin and I were left in the lecture hall. He was on the podium gathering his things and hadn't noticed me. It was mid-autumn, and the setting sun cast a few rays of golden light inside, covering the windowsill with a layer of golden leaves. My usually indifferent heart suddenly realized this was a poetic season. I stood up and walked to the podium. "Professor Zhang, I have a question unrelated to today's lecture." Zhang Bin looked up at me, nodded, then lowered his head and continued packing his things. "Regarding ball lightning, what can you tell me?" I asked the question that had been buried deep in my heart but never uttered. Zhang Bin's hand stopped moving. He raised his head but didn't look at me. Instead, he gazed at the sunset outside the window as if that was what I was referring to. "What do you want to know?" he asked after a few seconds. "Everything about it," I said. Zhang Bin stared at the sunset motionlessly, letting the sunlight shine directly on his face. The sunlight was still very bright at this time. Didn't it hurt his eyes? For example, its historical records. I had to ask more specifically. In Europe, it has been recorded since the Middle Ages. In China, relatively detailed records were written by Zhang Jujing in the Ming Dynasty. But it wasn't until 1837 that the first formal scientific record was made. As a natural phenomenon, it has only been accepted by the scientific community in the last 40 years. So, what about the theories? There are many, Zhang Bin simply replied and then fell silent. He took his gaze away from the sunset but didn't resume gathering his things, as if deep in thought. What is the most traditional theory? It is believed to be a vortex like high-temperature plasma, with centrifugal force caused by internal high-speed rotation balancing with external atmospheric pressure, thus maintaining a relatively long-term stability. Anything else? Some believe it is a chemical reaction between high-temperature mixed gases, thus maintaining energy stability. Can you tell me more? I said. Asking him questions felt like pushing a heavy millstone, moving it just a bit with each push. There's also the microwave maser-soliton theory, which suggests that ball lightning is caused by atmospheric microwaves with a volume of several cubic meters. Microwave masers are similar to low-energy lasers. When the volume of the air is large, the microwave maser creates a local electric field, or soliton, resulting in visible ball lightning. What about the latest theories? There are many as well. One gaining attention is the theory by Abrahamson and Dennis from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, which suggests that ball lightning mainly consists of a network of microscale silicon particles burning to form a sphere. Other theories are more varied, and some even suggest it's cold nuclear fusion in the air. Zhang Bin paused and finally said more. In China, the Institute of Atmospheric Physics at the Chinese Academy of Sciences proposed the theory of plasma in the atmosphere. Starting from the electromagnetic fluid mechanics equation, they introduced a vortex-soliton resonant cavity model. Under appropriate temperature field boundary conditions, they obtained a solution for atmospheric plasma vortices fireorb and the necessary and sufficient conditions for their existence through numerical equation solving. What do you think of these theories? Zhang Bin slowly shook his head. To prove the correctness of these theories, ball lightning must be produced in a laboratory, but no one has succeeded yet. In China, how many reports are there of ball lightning sightings? Quite a few, probably over 1,000. The most famous is the clear capture of ball lightning in a documentary on the Yangtze River flood filmed by CCTV in 1998. Professor Zhang, one last question. Is there anyone in the domestic atmospheric physics community who has seen it with their own eyes? Zhang Bin looked out at the sunset again. Yes. When? July 1962. Where? Mount Tai, at the peak of Jade Emperor. Do you know where this person is now? Zhang Bin shook his head and glanced at his watch. You should go to the cafeteria to get some food. With that, he picked up his things and walked out. I caught up with him, pouring out all the questions I had kept in my heart for so many years. Professor Zhang, can you imagine such a thing that can pass through walls effortlessly as a fireball, flying through the air without you feeling any heat, yet can instantly turn a person into ashes? There's a record of it, burning a couple sleeping under the covers into ashes without leaving a single scorch mark on the bedding. Can you imagine it entering a refrigerator and instantly turning all the frozen food into steaming hot dishes while the refrigerator itself remains unaffected? Can you imagine it burning the shirt you're wearing while you feel nothing? Can any of the theories you've mentioned explain all this? I've said that none of those theories hold up, Zhang Bin said without stopping. Then, if we go beyond atmospheric physics, do you think current physics, or even all of science, can explain this phenomenon? Don't you feel any curiosity about this? Seeing you like this, I'm even more shocked than seeing ball lightning. Zhang Bin stopped, turned around, and looked directly at me for the first time. Have you seen ball lightning? I'm just using a metaphor. I couldn't bring myself to tell this indifferent person the deepest secret in my heart. This indifference towards the profound mysteries of nature has become a public hazard in society and has long affected science. If there were fewer people like this in academia, humanity might have already flown to Sagittarius. Zhang Bin said, atmospheric physics is a very practical science. Ball lightning is an extremely rare phenomenon. The International Lightning Protection Standards IEC/TC81 and China's 1993 design specifications for building lightning protection don't take it into account. So spending too much energy on this thing is not very meaningful. There's not much to say to people like him. I thanked him and turned to leave. Admittedly, His acknowledgement of the existence of ball lightning is already a significant progress. Until 1963, the scientific community formally recognized the existence of this type of lightning. Before that, all sighting reports were dismissed as illusions. One day that year, Roger Jennison, an electromagnetism professor at Kent State University, personally witnessed a ball lightning at an airport in New York. The fireball, about 20 centimeters in diameter, passed through the wall into a hangar, crossed the body of an aircraft inside the hangar, and then flew out of the hangar through another wall and disappeared. That night, for the first time, I entered ball lightning as a search term on the Google homepage. I didn't have high hopes, but there were over 40,000 web pages in the search results. For the first time, I felt that the thing I was ready to devote my entire life to was something that all humanity was also paying attention to. Another new semester began, and the hot summer arrived. Summer meant one more thing to me. Thunderstorms would occur, making me feel closer to it. That day, Zhangbin suddenly came to see me. His course had ended last semester, and I had almost forgotten about him. He said to me, "Chun, I heard that both your parents are gone, and you're in a difficult financial situation. This summer, I have a project that needs an assistant. Can you join?" I asked what the project was. "It's for parameter demonstration of lightning protection facilities for a designed railway in Yunnan province. There is also another purpose. In the newly developing National Lightning Protection Design Specifications, it's planned to adjust the previous nationwide standard lightning density coefficient of 0.015 to be determined according to the conditions of each region. We are going to conduct observation work in the Yunnan area." I agreed to join him. Although my financial situation wasn't great, it was manageable. I agreed to go because this was my first chance to practically engage in lightning research. The project team had more than a dozen people, divided into 5 groups spread over a vast area, with hundreds of kilometers between them. My group had 3 formal members besides the driver and the experiment worker: Zhang Bin, his graduate student Zhao Yu, and myself. After arriving in the study area, we stayed at a county-level meteorological station. The next morning, the weather was great. We would start our first day of field work. While moving instruments and equipment from the temporary warehouse to the car, I asked Zhang Bin, "Professor Zhang, are there any good methods for probing the internal structure of lightning?" Zhang Bin gave me a sharp look. He clearly knew what I was thinking. From the perspective of current domestic engineering needs, studying the physical structure of lightning is not a priority. The most pressing task is large-scale design research. Every time my questions touched on ball lightning, even remotely as this time, he would avoid answering. It seems this man truly detests research without practical value. Zhao Yu answered my question: "Not many methods. Currently, lightning voltage can't be measured directly. It can only be indirectly deduced from its current value. The most common instrument for studying the physical structure of lightning is this thing." He pointed to a pile of tubular objects in a corner of the warehouse. This is called a magnetic steel recorder. It is used to record the amplitude and polarity of lightning current. It's made of material with high residual magnetism. When the conductor in its middle strikes the lightning, the residual magnetism formed in the recorder due to the magnetic field generated by the lightning current can be used to calculate the lightning current's intensity and polarity. This is the 60Si2MN model. There are also plastic tube models, blade core models, and iron powder models. Will we use it this time? Of course, why else bring it? But that will be later. The first phase's task was to install a lightning positioning system in the observation area. This system, using a large number of dispersed lightning sensors to centralize signals to a computer, can automatically count the number, frequency, and distribution of lightning strikes in a specific area. This is essentially a system that only counts and positions, not involving lightning's physical parameters, so it didn't interest me. The main job was installing sensors in the field, which was hard work. If lucky, we could mount the sensors on utility poles or high-voltage towers, but most of the time, we had to erect the poles ourselves. After a few days, the experiment workers were all complaining. Zhao Yu was a person who couldn't muster interest in anything, especially his major. He would drag out the work as much as possible and be lazy whenever he could. He initially praised the tropical rainforest scenery around us, but after the novelty wore off, he became listless. However, he was an easygoing person, and we got along well. Every evening when we returned to the county, Zhang Bin would always be in his room, busily organizing the day's data. Zhao Yu, on the other hand, would slip away whenever he had the chance, dragging me to drink in the ancient, rustic street of the county. That street often had no electricity, and the old wooden houses flickered in candlelight, taking us back to a time without atmospheric physics, other physics, or even science, making us forget reality for a while. This day, we sat in the candlelit interior of a small inn, slightly drunk. Zhao Yu said to me, "If the people in the depths of this rainforest had seen your ball lightning, they would certainly have a perfect explanation." I said, "I asked the locals. They saw it long ago and explained it long ago. It's a ghost lantern. Isn't that enough?" Zhao Yu spread his hands. "Perfect. Those plasma and soliton resonant cavity theories might not tell you more than this explanation. Modernization means complication, and I don't like complications." I snorted. "People like you, with such an attitude towards work, are only tolerated by mentors like Professor Zhang." "Don't mention Zhang Bin," Zhao Yu said drunkenly, waving his hand. "He's the kind of person who, if a key falls to the ground, won't look in the direction the sound came from but instead gets a ruler and a chalk, marks the entire floor with grids, and then searches square by square." We both buried our heads in laughter. People like him only do the work that machines are destined to do in the future. Creativity and imagination are meaningless to them. In academia, they cover up their lack of inspiration and mediocrity with so-called rigor and seriousness. You've seen it. Universities are full of these people. But on the other hand, with time, they always find something by searching square by square, so they don't do too badly professionally. What has Zhang Bin found? He seems to have led the development of a lightning protection coating for high-voltage lines. In terms of lightning protection alone, the effect is pretty good. Using this coating on high-voltage lines allows them to do away with the uppermost lightning protection wire. But the coating is too costly. If used on a large scale, the overall cost would be higher than traditional lightning rods, so it ultimately has no practical value. It earned him a few papers and a provincial-level scientific and technological achievement second prize. Other than that, he doesn't seem to have much else. The project finally moved to the stage I had been anticipating, measuring the physical parameters of lightning. We went to the field to install a large number of magnetic steel recorders and lightning-catching antennas. After each thunderstorm, we would go retrieve the magnetic steel recorders that had been struck by lightning to record data. We had to be very careful at this stage, avoiding shocks and staying away from power lines and other magnetic sources to prevent disturbance to the residual magnetism in the magnetic steel recorders. Using a magnetic field strength needle, we degaussed each magnetic steel recorder and then reinstalled them for the next strike. The specific work at this stage was just as tedious and tough, but I was very enthusiastic. After all, it was my first time measuring lightning quantitatively. Zhao Yu noticed this and became even lazier. When Zhang Bin wasn't around, he would leave all the work to me and go fishing in a nearby river. The magnetic steel recorder measured lightning currents typically around 10,000 amperes, with a maximum of 100,000 amperes. This allows us to deduce that the voltage in lightning can reach up to 1 billion volts. In such extreme physical conditions, what do you think could be produced? I asked Zhao Yu. Zhao Yu said indifferently, "What can it produce? The energy in nuclear explosions and high-energy accelerators is much greater than this, and they haven't produced the kind of thing you imagine. Atmospheric physics is a very ordinary discipline, but you insist on making it mysterious. I'm the opposite. I'm used to trivializing the sacred." He said this while gazing sentimentally at the dark green tropical rainforest around the meteorological station. "Brother, you go chase that mysterious fireball. I'm going to enjoy my ordinary life." His graduate studies were coming to an end, and he didn't want to pursue a PhD. After returning to school, I continued taking classes and participated in several of Zhang Bin's projects during my free time and vacations. His adherence to rules sometimes annoyed me, but other than that, he was easygoing and had a wealth of practical experience. More importantly, his field was the closest to what I was pursuing. For these reasons, I was accepted as Zhang Bin's graduate student after graduation. As I expected, Zhang Bin firmly opposed making ball lightning the topic of my master's thesis. In other matters, he was very easygoing, even tolerating lazy students like Zhao Yu. But on this matter, he was uncompromising. Young people shouldn't be obsessed with some illusory things, he said. Ball lightning is an objectively recognized existence in the scientific community. How is it illusory? I still say that if even international standards and national regulations don't consider it, what's the point? When you were an undergraduate, you studied your major like you were learning basic science. Your knowledge is wide but shallow. As a graduate student, you can't do that. But Professor Zhang, atmospheric physics is essentially a fundamental discipline. Besides its engineering significance, it also has the task of understanding the world. But in our country, serving economic development is the priority. Even so, if ball lightning were considered in the lightning protection measures of the Huangdao oil depot, the disaster in 1989 might have been avoided. The cause of the 1989 Huangdao fire is just a speculation, and the study of ball lightning involves even more speculation. You must avoid this harmful factor in your future studies. We couldn't continue on this topic. Since I was prepared to devote my life to that pursuit, what topic I chose for my master's wasn't very important. So, I followed Zhang Bin's advice and worked on a project related to a lightning protection system for a computer center. 2 years later, graduate school ended smoothly and uneventfully. To be fair, during these 2 years, I did learn quite a bit from Zhang Bin. His technical rigor, proficient experimental skills, and rich engineering experience greatly benefited me. However, the core thing I needed couldn't be obtained from him, and I had known that 3 years ago. I also learned a little about Zhang Bin's personal life. His wife had passed away early, and he had no children. He had been living alone for many years and rarely socialized. This monotonous life was somewhat similar to mine, but I felt that living such a life requires an overriding pursuit. As my father put it, being obsessed with something, or as the beautiful girl in the library 6 years ago said, having a purpose. Zhang Bin wasn't obsessed with anything and had no purpose. He was just conventionally engaged in those dull applied research projects, treating them as work rather than pleasure, and held the same rigid attitude towards fame and fortune. If that were the case, life would be more like torture. So I felt a bit of sympathy for him. I didn't think I was ready to explore that mystery. On the contrary, everything I had learned in the past 6 years only made me more acutely aware of my powerlessness in front of it. Initially, my primary focus was on physics, but I later realized that physics was like a big mystery. At its end, even the existence of the entire universe was in question. If we assume ball lightning is not a supernatural phenomenon, understanding it should involve a lower level of physics. Maxwell's equations for electromagnetism and the Navier-Stokes equations for fluid dynamics should suffice. I later learned how shallow and naive my thinking was at the time. But compared to ball lightning, all known structures in electromagnetism and fluid dynamics are very simple. If ball lightning forms a complex self-stabilizing, self-balancing structure while adhering to the fundamental laws of electromagnetism and fluid dynamics, its mathematical description must be extremely complex. Like how the simplest rules of Go create the most complicated game in the world. So now I believe what I need most is mathematics. Secondly, mathematics. Thirdly, still mathematics. To unravel the mystery of ball lightning, complex mathematical tools are indispensable. But various mathematical tools are like wild horses, hard to master. Although Zhang Bin thinks my mathematical ability far exceeds the usual needs of atmospheric physics, I know I am still far from being able to study ball lightning. When dealing with complex electromagnetic and fluid structures, the mathematical descriptions become terrifyingly complicated. The strange partial differential equations are like nooses, and the intricate matrices are like traps full of blades. I know I have much to learn before the real exploration begins, so I decided to pursue a PhD. My doctoral advisor was named Gao Bo, and he was from MIT. He was the exact opposite of Zhang Bin. The first thing that caught my attention was his nickname, Fireball. Later, I found out it had nothing to do with ball lightning. It might be because of his lively mind and energetic personality. When I proposed making ball lightning the subject of my doctoral thesis, he readily agreed. On the contrary, I had concerns because this research required a large lightning simulation device, which was only available once in the country and certainly not for my use. But Galbo didn't seem to care. Listen, what you need is just a pencil and a piece of paper. What you need to do is build a mathematical model of ball lightning. This should be a self-consistent model, theoretically original, mathematically perfect, and capable of running on a computer. Just consider it a theoretical artwork. I couldn't help but express my concern. Something that completely disregards experiments won't be accepted here, will it? Galbo waved his hand. Can black holes be accepted? With no direct evidence of their existence, see how far the astrophysics community has developed its theory and how many people make a living from it. Ball lightning is at least a real existence. Don't worry. If you meet my requirements and the thesis doesn't pass, I'll resign and roll out of this university with you. Compared to Zhang Bin, I felt he went too far in another extreme. I wasn't after a theoretical artwork, but being Galbo's student made me happy. I decided to go back to my hometown during the vacation before the semester started to see the old neighbors who had always helped me. I realized there might be few opportunities to return in the future. When the train arrived at Tian Station, I felt a stir in my heart, remembering what Zhang Bin said about an atmospheric physicist witnessing ball lightning at the Jade Emperor Peak. So I got off here to climb Mount Tai. I took the bus to Zhongtian Gate and initially wanted to take the cable car to the mountaintop, but seeing the long queue, I decided to hike up instead. The mountain was shrouded in thick fog, and the forests on either side appeared as vague black shadows that disappeared into the white mist after a short distance. Along the way, stone carvings from various eras kept appearing and fading away. Ever since going to Yunnan with Zhang Bin, I've always felt a sense of defeat when in nature. Looking at this living, breathing world, displaying its mystery and unimaginable complexity and change, it's hard to imagine it being bound by the thin equations of humankind. At such moments, I recall Einstein's words in his later years. Every leaf outside the window makes human science seem so naive and powerless. But this feeling of defeat was soon replaced by physical fatigue. Looking at the stone steps stretching endlessly into the fog ahead, the south heavenly gate seemed as if it were above the atmosphere. It was then that I saw her for the first time. She caught my attention because of the contrast with everyone around her. Along the way, I constantly saw couples. The women were exhausted, sitting on the steps, while the men stood beside them, panting and trying to persuade their partners to keep going. Whenever I passed someone or occasionally someone passed me, I could hear the others' rapid breathing. I tried to keep pace with a porter. His broad, bronze back gave me the strength to keep climbing. At that moment, a white figure nimbly passed both the porter and me. The girl was dressed in a white shirt and white jeans, like a condensed wisp of fog. In this slowly moving crowd, her climbing speed was remarkable. Her steps were light and bounding, without a hint of heaviness. As she passed by me, I didn't hear any sound of heavy breathing. She turned to look back, not at me but at the porter. Her expression was calm, with no trace of fatigue, and her slim body seemed weightless. Climbing this tiring mountain road was like taking a leisurely stroll down a tree-lined path for her. Before long, her figure disappeared into the white fog. When I finally reached the south heavenly gate, I saw it already above the sea of clouds. The sun was setting in the west, dyeing the cloud sea red. Dragging my heavy feet, I made my way to the Jade Emperor Peak Meteorological Station. The people there seemed unfazed when they learned about my identity and purpose. At this famous station, atmospheric scientists often come for various observations. They told me the station chief had gone down the mountain for something and introduced me to the deputy chief. When we met, we both exclaimed in surprise the deputy chief was Zhao Yu. It had been more than 3 years since our trip to Yunnan. When I asked how he ended up in this strange place, Zhao Yu said, "I came here for some peace and quiet. The world below is too darn troublesome. You might as well become a Taoist at Dai Temple then. That place isn't quiet anymore either. And you? Still chasing that phantom?" I explained my purpose to him. He shook his head and said, 1962 was too long ago. The station has changed several times since then, so probably no one knows about it anymore. I said, "It doesn't matter. I wanted to learn about it because it was the first case in China where an atmospheric physicist witnessed ball lightning. But it's not that important. I also came up to clear my head. Who knows, I might catch a thunderstorm. Other than the golden summit of Wudong, this is the best place to observe lightning. Who would be crazy enough to observe lightning? I think you're really obsessed. Up here, we avoid thunderstorms as much as possible. But if you're really interested, stay a few more days. You might get lucky. Zhao Yu led me to his dormitory. It was mealtime, so he called the cafeteria to bring us some food, including thin and crispy Mount Tai pancakes, green onions as thick as wine glasses, and a bottle of Mount Tai liquor. Zhao Yu thanked the old cook who brought the food. When the old man turned to leave, Zhao Yu suddenly remembered something and asked, "Master Wang, when did you start working at the station?" "I've been working in this cafeteria since 1960. Those were tough times back then. There was no you yet, Deputy Chief Zhao." Zhao Yu and I exchanged joyful glances. I eagerly asked, "Did you ever see ball lightning? Are you talking about the rolling thunder?" "Yes, that's what people call it. Of course I've seen it. I've seen it 3 or 4 times in the past 40 years. Zhao Yu brought out another cup, and we warmly invited old Wang to join us. As I poured him a drink, I asked, "Do you remember the one from 1962? Funny you should mention that one. I remember it clearly because someone got hurt." Old Wang began to recount. "It was at the end of July, around 7 p.m., I think. It should have been bright at that time of year, but the clouds were so thick that you couldn't see anything without a light. The rain was pouring down in buckets, and if you stood in it, you'd suffocate. The thunder was continuous, one after the other, without a break. That might have been thunderstorm weather due to a frontal passage," Zhao Yu added to me. I heard a peal of thunder. The lightning before the thunder was so bright that even inside, it dazzled my eyes. Then I heard someone shouting outside that someone was injured, so I ran out to help. There were 4 people at the station doing scientific research then, and one of them was struck by lightning. I dragged him in from the pouring rain. His leg was smoking, sizzling as the rain hit it, but he was still conscious. That's when the rolling thunder came in. It came through the west window, which was closed at the time. That thing was about the size of this pancake, blood red, and lit up the whole room with a red glow. It floated around the room, moving like this." He gestured in the air with his wine glass. "Floating, floating." I was scared out of my wits, couldn't even speak. But those scientific guys weren't panicking. They told us not to touch it. The thing floated for a while, sometimes up to the ceiling, sometimes skimming over the bed. Luckily, it didn't touch anyone. Finally, it went into the chimney and exploded with a bang. I've heard all kinds of thunder on this mountaintop over the years, but I still don't remember hearing a sound that loud again. My ears buzzed for days afterward, and my left ear has been bad ever since. The oil lamp in the room was blown out. The glass lampshade and the thermos were shattered, and there was a scorch mark on the bed sheet. Later, we saw the chimney on the roof was blown to pieces. Where were those 4 researchers from? Don't know. After so many years, I only remember the injured person. 2 of us from the station carried him down the mountain to the hospital. He was very young, seemed to be a college student at the time. One of his legs was burned beyond recognition. The hospital in Taiyan wasn't well equipped, so they sent him to Jinan. Poor guy probably ended up with a disability. I think his last name was Zhang, called Zhang. Zhang Fu. Zhao Yu suddenly slammed his glass onto the table. Zhang Hefu? Yes, that's the name. I looked after him for 2 days at Taiyan Hospital. After he left, he sent me a thank you letter from Beijing, I think. Then there was no more news. Don't know where he is now. Zhao Yu said to old Wang, "He's in Nanjing, teaching at my alma mater. He's our graduate advisor." What? I nearly dropped my wine glass. Zhangbin used to go by that name. He changed it during the Cultural Revolution because it reminded people of Khrushchev. Zhao Yu and I didn't speak for a long time. Old Wang broke the silence. That's not too much of a coincidence. You all work in the same field. He was a pretty good guy, in fact. His leg hurt so bad he bit through his lip, but he still sat up reading. I told him to rest, but he said he had to make the most of his time from then on. He had just found his life's goal. He wanted to study that thing and create it. Study and create what? I asked. Rolling thunder. What you call ball lightning. Zhao Yu and I stared blankly at each other. Old Wang, unaware of our expressions, continued. He said he would spend his whole life studying that thing. You could tell he was fascinated by it after seeing the rolling thunder on the mountaintop. That's how people are. Sometimes you don't know how, but you become obsessed with something, and you can't shake it off for the rest of your life. Take me, for instance. 20 years ago, I was getting firewood for cooking and pulled out a tree root. I was about to throw it into the fire when I thought it looked like a tiger. I carved it and put it aside. It looked pretty good. Since then, I became obsessed with root carving. I stayed on the mountain after retiring because of that. I then noticed that Zhao Yu's room indeed had many root carvings, big and small. He told me they were all old Wang's work. We never discussed Zhangbin again. Though we both thought about it, the shock it brought us was hard to express in words. After dinner, Zhao Yu took me for a walk around the meteorological station in the dark. When we passed the only lit window of their small guest house, I stopped in surprise. I saw the girl in white inside, alone in the room. Books and drawings were spread out on the two beds and the table. She was pacing back and forth, seemingly deep in thought. "Hey, be polite. Don't spy through people's windows." Zhao Yu pushed me from behind. "I saw her on my way up," I explained. "She's here to observe lightning. The Provincial Meteorological Bureau gave us a heads up before she came, but they didn't say where she's from. Must be a big organization. They're planning to use helicopters to transport equipment to the mountaintop." Unexpectedly, there was a thunderstorm that afternoon. The thunderstorm's intensity on the mountaintop was incomparable to that below. At that moment, Mount Tai seemed like Earth's lightning rod, attracting all the lightning in the universe. Sparks danced on the roof, numbing your entire body in waves. Here, there was almost no gap between the lightning and the thunder. Each thunderclap shook every cell in your body. You felt as if the mountain beneath your feet was shattered, your soul shaken out of its shell, fearfully drifting amidst the brilliant flashes with nowhere to hide. I saw that girl standing on the corridor's outer side, letting the gale blow her short hair apart. Her slim, almost fragile-looking figure was silhouetted against the black cloud's electric web, standing motionless amidst the thunder, creating an unforgettable picture. "You better step back a bit. It's not safe there, and you're getting soaked," I shouted at her from behind. She snapped out of her fascination with the lightning and took 2 steps back. "Thank you." She turned her head to glance at me, giving a charming smile. "You might not believe this, but it's only at times like this that I feel a moment of peace." Strangely, you had to shout to make yourself heard in this deafening thunder, but she spoke softly, and her gentle words miraculously cut through the noise. I heard her clearly. At this point, my fascination with this mysterious girl surpassed my interest in the lightning. "You're quite unique," I said truthfully. "I heard you're a graduate of the atmospheric electricity program." She didn't respond to my comment. The thunder subsided, and we could talk at ease. I asked her, "You're here to observe lightning?" From what Zhao Yu had hinted, it seemed her background wasn't to be mentioned, so I put it that way. "Yes." "Which aspects are you focusing on?" "The generation process of lightning. I don't mean to belittle your profession, but the current atmospheric physics field is still debating basic issues like thunderclouds or electricity. We don't even understand how lightning rods work." I immediately knew that even if she wasn't in atmospheric physics, she was quite knowledgeable about it. Theories about thunderclouds and electricity, as she said, aren't yet satisfactory. As for the principle of lightning rods, something even elementary school students seem to know, it's not theoretically clear. Recent precise calculations of the discharge amount from a lightning rod's metal tip show it's far from neutralizing the charges accumulated in a thunderstorm cloud. So your research is very foundational. The ultimate goal is practical. Studying lightning generation. Artificial lightning suppression? No, artificial lightning creation. Creating lightning? For what? She smiled sweetly. Guess? Using lightning to produce nitrogen fertilizer? She shook her head. Using lightning as a new energy source? She shook her head again. Ha, it can't be for power generation. Creating lightning would consume more energy. Then there's only one possibility left. I want to make a joke using lightning to kill people? She nodded. I laughed out loud. Then you need to solve the targeting problem. A lightning path is a random zigzag. She sighed softly. That's something to consider later. We're far from solving the issue of how lightning is generated. We're not interested in the lightning generated by thunderstorm clouds. The key is to generate those rare dry lightning bolts that can appear on clear days, but it's hard to observe them now. What's wrong? You're serious? I said, dumbfounded. Of course. Our research's most valuable future application would be to establish a highly efficient air defense system. We could create a vast lightning field in the air over a city or other target. Any enemy aircraft entering this lightning field would trigger a discharge. In this case, the targeting problem you mentioned wouldn't matter. Of course, if we use the ground as the other pole of the lightning field, we could strike ground targets, but that would bring more problems. We're just doing feasibility studies, proposing concepts, and exploring the most basic aspects. If it's really feasible, the actual implementation will rely on you more specialized institutions. I let out a sigh of relief. You're a soldier? She introduced herself as Lin Yun, a doctoral student at the National University of Defense Technology, majoring in air defense weapon systems. The rain stopped, and the setting sun cast 1,000 beams of golden light through the clouds. Oh, look at the world. It's so fresh, as if it was just born from the thunderstorm. Lin Yun exclaimed in delight. That was how I felt too. I didn't know if it was because of the thunderstorm or this girl before me, but I had never felt this way before. That evening, Lin Yun, Zhao Yu, and I went for a walk. Soon Zhao Yu was called back by a phone call from the station, and Lin Yun and I continued along a mountain path, eventually reaching Heavenly Street. By then, night had deepened, and a thin layer of mist covered the street. The streetlights cast a dim, hazy light through the fog. The mountain night was so quiet. The clamor below felt like a distant memory. The mist cleared a bit, and a few sparse stars appeared in the sky, immediately reflected in her clear eyes. I shared my deepest secret with Lin Yun. I told her about that nightmare birthday night years ago and my decision to devote my life to that pursuit. It was the first time I told anyone these things. Do you hate ball lightning? Lin Yun asked. For something so mysterious and unfathomable that all humanity can't understand. No matter how much disaster it brings you, it's hard to hate it. At first, I was just curious. As my knowledge grew, that curiosity transformed into something else. I became completely captivated by it. To me, it's like a doorway to another world, where I can see many wonderful, magical things I've dreamed of. At that moment, a gentle breeze blew, dispersing the fog. In the sky, the brilliant summer night's starry sea appeared, and far below, the myriad lights of Taiyan formed another small sea of stars, like the former reflected in a small lake. Lin Yun recited a poem in her soft voice. The distant streetlights are on. They look like countless stars shining. The stars in the sky are now visible. They look like countless streetlights. I continued reciting. I imagine that in the misty sky, there must be a beautiful market. The items displayed in the market must be rare treasures not found in this world. My tears welled up. The beautiful night world trembled for a moment in my tears, then became clearer than before. I realized I was a dreamer, and I also knew that in this world, such a path in life was fraught with unknown dangers. Even if the south heavenly gate in the fog never appeared, I would keep climbing. I have no choice. 2 years of doctoral studies passed quickly. During this time, I developed my first mathematical model of ball lightning. Gaobo was an excellent mentor. His strength lay in effectively stimulating students' creativity. His obsession with theory and disregard for experiments were equally extreme. In this environment, my mathematical model became a purely imaginative construct with no experimental basis. Nonetheless, the thesis defense was successful, with the evaluation stating, "The theory is novel, demonstrating a solid mathematical foundation and skilled techniques." Naturally, the model's fatal experimental flaw caused significant controversy. At the end of the defense, one committee member made a snide comment. "One last question. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin?" Provoking a round of laughter. Zhang Bin was a member of the thesis defense committee. He only asked an insignificant question and didn't offer much opinion. I hadn't mentioned the Mount Tai incident to him in these 2 years, though I couldn't explain why. Perhaps I foresaw that it would force him to reveal a painful secret. But now, as I was about to leave the academy, I couldn't resist trying to get to the bottom of things. I went to Zhang Bin's home and told him what I had heard on Mount Tai. After hearing it, he didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor, smoking cigarette after cigarette. After finishing one, he stood up heavily and said to me, "Come with me." He then led me to the tightly shut door. Zhangbin lived alone in a two-bedroom apartment, doing all his living in one room, while the door to the other room remained perpetually closed. Xiaoyu once told me that when a friend from another province came to visit, he asked if his friend could stay at Zhangbin's place for a night. Surprisingly, Zhangbin said there was no room. Though Zhangbin wasn't a very social person, he wasn't that unapproachable. So both Xiaoyu and I found the closed room rather mysterious. Zhangbin opened the door, and the first thing I saw was a row of tall stacks of cardboard boxes. Beyond them, more boxes were piled on the floor, and aside from these, there seemed to be no large items in the room. On the opposite wall hung a black and white photograph of a woman wearing glasses. The woman had short hair, typical of that era, and her eyes behind the glasses were full of spirit. I said, "Professor Zhang, you should also have a proper assessment of your work. We got fascinated by something and gave it our best effort. That's enough. That's a form of success." "Thank you for your consolation," he said weakly. "I'm also saying it to myself. When I reach your age, I'll comfort myself in the same way." Zhangbin pointed to the surrounding boxes. "These, along with some discs, you can take them all. Look at them if you're interested. If not, that's fine too. They don't mean much. And this notebook, you can take it as well. I get this feeling of fear whenever I look at it." "Thank you," I said, my throat tightening. I pointed to the photo on the wall. "Can I scan a copy of this?" "Of course, but what for?" "Perhaps someday I can let the whole world know that she was the first to take direct measurements of ball lightning." Zhangbin carefully took the photo off the wall and handed it to me. Her name was Zhang Min, a graduate of Peking University's physics department, class of '63. The next day, I moved all the boxes from Zhangbin's home to my dormitory, which now looked like a warehouse. I spent days reading through them, day and night. I felt like an inexperienced mountaineer who had exhausted himself climbing to a peak he thought no one had reached, only to find tints left behind by those who had gone before and their footprints continuing upward. So far, I've gone through 3 mathematical models that Zhangbin constructed, each incredibly ingenious. One of them shared the same approach as my doctoral thesis, only it was completed more than a decade earlier. What embarrassed me even more was that in the last few pages of this manuscript, he pointed out the model's flaws that neither I, Gaobo, nor the other thesis defense committee members had noticed. In the other 2 models, he similarly identified mistakes. But what I saw the most were incomplete mathematical models that Zhangbin found errors in during the construction process. One night, as I was buried in the pile of manuscripts, Gaobo came to see me. He glanced around at the mountain of calculations and shook his head. "So, you really want to spend your life like that?" he asked. I smiled at him and said, "Professor Gao." He waved his hand. "I'm no longer your professor. If everything goes well, we'll be colleagues." Then it's easier to say this. "Honestly, Professor Gao, I've never met someone as talented as you, and this is not flattery. But forgive me for being blunt. I think you often lack perseverance in what you do. For example, that CAD system for building lightning protection, it was such a good project, just a bit more effort, and it would have been completed. But after finishing the pioneering work, you found it troublesome and handed it off to someone else. This kind of perseverance, spending a lifetime on one thing, is no longer in tune with the times. These days, apart from basic science, other research should be swift and decisive. I'm here today to further demonstrate my lack of perseverance. Remember what I said? If your thesis didn't pass, I'd resign. But it passed. I'm still resigning." You see now, that promise was a bit of a trap. Where to next? The Lightning Research Institute at the Academy of Atmospheric Sciences has invited me to be the director. I'm tired of university life. What about you? Any plans for the future? Come with me. I said I would think about it and agreed a couple of days later. I didn't know much about the place, but it was the largest lightning research institution in the country. 2 nights before leaving the school, I was still reading through the manuscripts when someone knocked on the door. It was Zhangbin. "Leaving?" he said, looking at the luggage I had already packed. "Yes, the day after tomorrow." "I heard you've retired?" He nodded. "I just finished the paperwork yesterday. I've reached that age. I just want to take a good rest. I've been too tired in this life." He sat down, and I lit a cigarette for him. We were silent for a while before he spoke. "I've come to tell you something else, something only you might understand." Do you know what has been the most painful thing in my life? I understand, Professor Zhang. It's indeed hard to break free from such an obsession after all these 30 years. But you haven't just been doing this in these 30 years. Besides, over the past 100 years, many who have devoted their entire lives to studying ball lightning might not have been luckier than you. Zhangbin smiled and shook his head. You completely misunderstood. I've experienced much more than you have. My understanding of science and life is likely deeper than yours. I have no regrets about these 30 years of research, nor do I feel pain. As you said, I gave it my best. How could I be so troubled over it? What then? I thought of how he had lived alone for so many years after losing his wife. He seemed to read my mind and said, Zhang Min's death was a blow to me. But, as you can understand, people like us, whose entire being is consumed by something until it becomes a part of us, see everything else in life as secondary. Then what could it be? I asked, puzzled. Zhang Bin smiled bitterly and shook his head again. It's hard to say. He continued to smoke heavily. I was baffled. Could there really be something unspeakable here? But because of our shared pursuit, there was an unspoken understanding between us, and I soon realized. I asked, didn't you say you've been looking for ball lightning for over 30 years without interruption? He exhaled a long puff of smoke and said, yes. After Zhang Min's death, my health deteriorated and my leg condition worsened, so I traveled less. But I never stopped looking. Almost every thunderstorm, at least nearby, I never missed. So, I paused, suddenly grasping the full extent of his pain. Yes, you've guessed it. In these 30 years, I haven't seen ball lightning again. Compared to other mysterious natural phenomena, ball lightning is not extremely rare. At least 1% of people in surveys claim to have seen it. However, its occurrence is entirely random, without any pattern. 30 years of searching through thunderstorms without ever encountering it again, this can only be blamed on the cruelty of fate. Zhang Bin continued, I read a Russian novel in my early years about a wealthy landowner whose only pleasure in life was fine wine. Once, he bought a bit of ancient wine from a mysterious traveler, salvaged from a sunken ship. After drinking that little bit, he was completely captivated by it. The traveler told him that 2 bottles of this wine were salvaged from the sunken ship, and the other was lost somewhere. The landowner didn't think much of it initially, but his craving for the wine left him sleepless. Eventually, he sold his estate and all his possessions, wandering the world in search of that second bottle. He endured countless hardships, searched the world over, from youth to old age, and finally found it. By then, he was a disease-ridden old beggar. He drank the wine and died in happiness. This man was lucky, I said. In some sense, so was Zhang Min. I nodded, deep in thought. After a while, Zhang Bin said, well, do you still maintain that detached attitude toward the pain I mentioned? I stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the campus and the night outside. No, Professor Zhang, I can't remain detached. That feeling for me is not just pain. It's a kind of terror. If you wanted to show me how perilous this path we're on is, you've succeeded. Yes, he had succeeded. I could endure spending a lifetime in vain, abandoning everything in life and dying alone. I could even give my life if necessary, but I couldn't endure never seeing it again. It was the first sighting of it that determined my life. We really couldn't stand the thought of never seeing it again. Others might find this hard to understand. But can you imagine a sailor enduring a lifetime without seeing the sea? A mountaineer never seeing snow-capped peaks? A pilot never seeing the blue sky? Perhaps, Zhang Bin said as he stood up, you can help us see it again. I looked blankly out the window. Professor Zhang, I don't know, but it's the last hope of my life. He said, I should go now. Is the photo scanned? I snapped back to reality. Oh, yes, it's done. I should have returned it sooner, but I broke the frame when I took it down. I wanted to buy a new one to put it in, but I've been too busy to go out. No need, the old one will do. He took the photo and said, these days, I always felt like something was missing in the room. I returned to the window and watched as my mentor's figure disappeared into the night. His limp was worse than usual, his steps looking so arduous. After Zhang Bin left, I turned off the light and lay down, but I couldn't fall asleep. So when it happened, I was sure I was wide awake. I heard a faint sigh. It was impossible to tell where the sound came from. It seemed to fill the entire dark space. I became alert, lifting my head off the pillow. Then I heard another sigh, very soft, but distinguishable. The school was already on break, and this dormitory building was almost empty. I sat up abruptly, scanning the dark room, seeing only those cardboard boxes stacked like a pile of randomly placed square stones. I turned on the light. In the few flickers before the fluorescent light fully illuminated, I saw a shadow on the box. It was white and vanished in an instant, its shape unclear. I couldn't be sure if this was an illusion, but I saw it move toward the window, trailing behind a streak. That was apparently a series of its own fleeting afterimages, like the extended persistence of vision of an observer. I thought of that strand of hair. I lay back on the bed with the light on, but sleep was even more unlikely now. The long night was hard to endure, so I got up, opened one of the boxes, and continued reading Zhang Bin's calculations. Starting from where I left off, I flipped through a dozen pages when one caught my eye. Half of the derivation on this page was crossed out with a large X, and the ink used for the X was very different from the original manuscript. In the margin, a concise formula was rewritten, clearly meant to replace the crossed-out part. The formula was written with the same ink as the X. What attracted my attention was the handwriting of the formula. It was delicate and meticulous, clearly different from Zhang Bin's original script. I took out the notebook Zhang Bin had given me, the one that had a burned section. I carefully opened it and compared the handwriting with the formula. The result, though unbelievable, was what I had expected. Zhang Bin was a meticulous person. Every part of the calculation manuscript was dated. This part was dated April 7, 1983, 12 years after his wife's death. But this was Zhang Min's handwriting. I carefully examined the formula and the crossed-out part. It was a formula for calculating the boundary conditions of low-dissipation plasma flow, concise and capable of replacing the cumbersome derivation that had been crossed out. This was because the formula used an existing parameter derived by Mitsubishi Electric's laboratory in 1985. They were then developing a high-efficiency generator using plasma jets to replace rotors. Although the project ultimately failed, its byproduct, the plasma fluid parameter, was widely used later on, but this was after 1985. I quickly rummaged through the remaining unopened boxes and found 5 more pages with similar handwriting modifications. If I searched carefully, I might find even more. Zhang Bin had written these calculations in the 1980s or later. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, clearly hearing my heartbeat. My gaze fell on the laptop on the desk. I turned it on and pulled up the scanned photo of Zhang Min from earlier. It was scanned with a high-resolution scanner, so I scrutinized it, trying to avoid meeting the piercing gaze of the person in the photo. I seemed to notice something and hurriedly opened an image processing software, something I often use to handle numerous lightning photos, so my computer had plenty of these. This software could automatically convert black and white photos to color. The software quickly processed the photo. Though the colors were a bit distorted, it still served my purpose. Black and white photos always make people look younger. This photo was taken a year before Zhang Min's accident. Now, the color revealed a fact concealed by black and white. Zhang Min in the photo looked much older than her actual age. Zhang Min was wearing a white lab coat in the photo. The coat had a pocket on the left chest, and something was in it. The fabric was thin, revealing some shape and detail of the object. It immediately caught my attention. I cropped that part of the image and processed it in another software, trying to extract more details. Handling those blurry lightning photos had made me quite adept at this. Soon, the outline and details of that object became clear. It was a 3-inch floppy disk. 5-inch disks weren't widely used in the country until the early 1980s, and 3-inch disks came even later. What should have been in her pocket was a roll of black punch tape. I yanked the computer's power cord out, but forgot the laptop had a battery. I had to shakily use the mouse to shut it down. After clicking the shutdown button, I quickly closed the computer. In my mind, Zhang Min's ghostly gaze still penetrated the closed laptop, staring at me. The dead silence of the night was like a cold, giant hand gripping me. When I told Galbo that I would follow him to the Lightning Research Institute, he said, "Before you make a final decision, I should make things clear. I know that you are now thinking about ball lightning. Although our starting points are different, I am also optimistic about this project, but you should know that at the beginning, I can't let the Institute put a lot of effort into your project. Do you know why Zhongbin failed? He got stuck in the theory and couldn't get out. But this can't be blamed on him. It's really limited by the conditions. In the past 2 years, I gave you the impression that you ignored experiments, but I was wrong. I didn't consider experiments when you were doing your doctoral project because the investment in such experiments is too high. Under our current conditions, it is simply not possible to do it well. Inaccurate or even unrealistic experiments are not good enough. The experimental results will hinder the theory. This remark made me re-understand Galbo. It is rare to find someone as active in academic thought as him and so realistic in society. This may be the characteristic of people who come from MIT. In fact, I think the same as him. I understand that it is essential to establish basic experimental facilities for the study of ball lightning, because the sign of successful research on ball lightning is to produce it artificially. These experimental facilities should first include large-scale lightning simulation devices, complex magnetic field generation devices, and more complex sensor detection systems. The budget for this system must be terrifyingly large. I am not a nerd. I know that to realize my ideal, I have to start from reality and take one step at a time. On the train, Galbo suddenly asked me about Lin Yun. It has been 2 years since we parted at Mount Tai, and the shadow of Lin Yun has never disappeared from my mind. However, because of my concentration on ball lightning, this memory has not developed into something uncontrollable. The short time I spent with her on Mount Tai is the most beautiful treasure in my memory. Memories of her often emerge when I am most tired, which makes me feel like listening to a soft music, a good rest. Galbo once said that he envied my state, because emotional life should be detached, and it is not good to get involved. Galbo said of Lin Yun, "She mentioned the Thunderbolt weapon system to you? I'm very interested in it. You want to work on defense projects? Why not? The military can't have a complete lightning research institute, so they will have to rely on us in the end. This type of project has a stable source of funding, and it is also a market with great potential. Since we separated, I have never contacted Lin Yun again. She only left me a mobile phone number, and Galbo asked me to contact her immediately after arriving in Beijing. You need to find out the current status of the military's lightning weapons research. Note, don't ask her directly. You can first invite her to dinner or a concert, and then wait until the relationship matures." Galbo looked like a cunning spy chief at this time. After arriving in Beijing, before I settled down, I called Lin Yun. When I heard that familiar voice, I felt an indescribable warmth, and I could tell she was also surprised to find out it was me. According to Galbo's suggestion, I should ask to visit her at her workplace, but I couldn't say it. Instead, she unexpectedly invited me to come over. Come to New Concept to find me. I have something to discuss with you. She then gave me an address in the suburbs of Beijing. New Concept? I immediately thought of Alexander's English textbook. Oh, we're used to calling it that. It's the National Defense University's New Concept Weapon Development Center. I've been working here since I graduated. Before I reported to the new unit, Galbo couldn't wait to ask me to find Lin Yun. After leaving the 4th Ring Road, the car drove for about half an hour and a wheat field appeared beside the road. There are many military research institutes in this area. Most of them are simple buildings with tall walls and no signs at the gates. But the New Concept Weapon Development Center is a 20-story building with a very modern and flamboyant appearance. It looks like an office building of a multinational company. Unlike other institutions nearby, there are no sentries at the gate, and people can enter and exit freely. I entered the spacious and bright lobby through the automatic door, took the elevator upstairs to find Lin Yun's office, and found that this place was similar to a civilian administrative agency. Looking through the half-open doors on both sides of the corridor, I saw that it was a modular layout of office space. Many people were busy with computers and documents. If it weren't for their military uniforms, I would have mistaken them for the office building of a large company. I also saw several foreigners, 2 of whom were even wearing their own military uniforms, chatting and laughing with Chinese soldiers in an office. In an office marked System Evaluation Department 2. When she walked towards me with a bright smile in her major's uniform, a beauty beyond fashion moved my heart, and I immediately knew that she belonged to the army. Is this place different than you imagined? She asked me after saying hello. It's so different. What on earth is this for? It's just what the name suggests. What are new concept weapons? For example, in World War II, the Soviet army tied explosives to train military dogs and let them crawl under German tanks. This was a new concept weapon. This idea is still considered a new concept, but it has many variations. For example, tying explosives to dolphins and letting them attack submarines, or training a group of birds to carry small bombs, etc. Here is the latest idea. Lin Yun leaned over her computer and called up a document with pictures and text that looked like an insect knowledge webpage. Install the highly corrosive sacks of satellites on insects such as cockroaches and let them destroy the integrated circuits of the enemy's weapon system. How interesting, I said. When I was looking at the computer screen, I was very close to Lin Yun and could smell a faint fragrance. It was a fragrance without all the sweetness. It had a pleasant bitterness, which reminded me of the green grass in the sunshine after a rainstorm. And look at this, a liquid that makes roads slippery and impassable when sprayed. This, a gas that stalls vehicles and tank engines. This is less interesting. A laser that scans an area like the electron gun on a television tube, making everyone in the area temporarily or permanently. Lin Yun's behavior surprised me. It seemed that anything in their information system could be easily retrieved and shown to outsiders. We produce concepts. Most of these concepts are useless. Some even look like jokes. But if 1% or even 1,000th of them have a chance of becoming a reality, then it's very meaningful. So this is a think tank. You could say that. The job of the department I work for is to find feasible ideas and conduct further research. Sometimes this research can go to a considerable depth, such as the lightning weapon system we are about to talk about. That she was talking about what Galbo wanted to know so quickly, but I still asked her another question that made me curious. What's going on with all those Western officers here? Visiting scholar. Weapons research is a science that also requires communication. New concept weapons are still a long way from being realized. They are just a concept. What this field needs most is active thinking, a lot of information, and the collision of various ideas. Communication is beneficial to both sides. That means you have also sent visiting scholars to each other. 2 years ago, after returning from Mount Tai, I went to Europe and North America as a visiting scholar and spent 3 months in their new concept weapons development organization. Their organization is called the Weapons System Advanced Evaluation Committee, which existed during the Kennedy era. How have you been these past 2 years? Are you still tracking ball lightning every day? I said, sure, there's something else I can do, but for now I can only keep track of it on paper. Then I'll give you a gift, she said, moving the mouse to look for something on the computer. This is a record of an eyewitness account of ball lightning. I said disapprovingly, I've seen thousands of these things. But this one is different, Lin Yun said, and a video appeared on the screen. In a clearing in the woods, there was a military helicopter. 2 people stood in front of the helicopter. One was Lin Yun, who was wearing an army training uniform, and the other was wearing a light flight suit. He was obviously the pilot of the helicopter. In the distance behind him, several balloons could be seen rising into the air. Lin Yun introduced, "This is Captain Wang Songlin, the helicopter pilot of the Army Aviation." Then I heard Lin Yun's voice in the video. "Say it again. I'll record it and send it to my friend." The captain said, "Okay. I saw something exactly like what you said. It was during the Yangtze River flood control in 1998. I set out to the disaster area to airdrop relief supplies. At an altitude of 700 meters, I accidentally flew into a thunderstorm cloud, which was an absolute no-fly zone, but I couldn't get out for a while. The turbulence in the cloud made the plane bounce up and down like a leaf in the wind, and my head hit the cabin cover. Most of the instrument pointers shook wildly, and I couldn't hear anything on the radio. It was dark outside, and suddenly a flash of lightning lit up, and then I saw it, the size of a basketball, emitting an orange-red light. As soon as it appeared, the interference sound in the radio suddenly increased. Pay attention to what I'm saying next," Lin Yun reminded me. The ball of light floated around the fuselage, not too fast. It first went from the nose to the tail, then rose vertically and passed through the rotor, and then passed through the rotor again and dropped under the belly of the fuselage. It floated like this for about half a minute, and then suddenly disappeared. "Wait, Replay this. I shouted. Just as Lin Yun said, this eyewitness record was indeed unusual. The video replayed, and after this segment, Lin Yun in the video asked the question I wanted to ask. Were you flying or hovering at the time? Will I hover in a thunderstorm cloud? Of course I will fly, at least 400 kilometers per hour, looking for an exit from the cloud. You must have remembered it wrongly. You should have been hovering at the time, otherwise it would be wrong. I know what you're thinking. That's the weird part. That thing is not affected by air currents at all. Even if I remembered it wrongly or I had an illusion at the time, the rotor was spinning all the time, and the air currents were very strong. Besides, isn't there any wind in the air? But the fireball was just slowly spinning around the aircraft. Taking the relative speed into account, its speed was also very fast, but it was definitely not affected by air currents. This is indeed important information. I said, I have seen some signs of this in many previous records. For example, there are eyewitness records that say that when ball lightning flies out of the room through doors or windows, the wind is blowing in from outside. There are also eyewitness records that directly describe ball lightning flying against the wind, but none of them is as real and credible as this sighting. If the movement of ball lightning is really not affected by airflow, then the claim that it is plasma is untenable, which is the basis of most current ball lightning theories. Can I meet the pilot? Lin Yun shook her head gently. It's impossible. Well, let's talk business. First, I want to show you what we have done in the past 2 years. After she finished speaking, she picked up the phone, as if to contact someone for a visit or something. It seemed that completing Galbo's task would be easy, so I looked at Lin Yun's desk. The first photo I saw was a group photo of Lin Yun and several Marines. They were all wearing the blue and white camouflage uniforms of the Marine Corps. Lin Yun was the only woman among them. She looked very young and childish. She held her submachine gun against her chest like a puppy. There were several landing craft on the sea behind them, and there was still smoke from the explosion nearby. I was then attracted by another photo. This one was of a young naval captain, very handsome and very elegant, with the background of the tall tower island of the Everest aircraft carrier that often appeared in the media. I immediately had a strong desire to ask Lin Yun who this was, but I restrained myself. At this time, Lin Yun finished the call and said to me, "Come on, I'll take you to see the results of our 2 years of hard work." We went out and took the elevator downstairs. On the way, Lin Yun said, "For the past 2 years, we have spent a lot of effort on lightning weapons. We have launched 2 sub-projects, but neither was successful. Now this project has been cancelled. This weapon system is the one that has gone the furthest and invested the most in the new concept, but the result is very tragic." After entering the lobby, I noticed that many people smiled and greeted Lin Yun, and I had a feeling that her status seemed to exceed that of a major. After we went out, Lin Yun took me to a car. When we sat in the front seat side by side, I smelled the faint, bitter fragrance of the grass after the rain again, which made me feel relaxed and happy. But this time the fragrance was more ethereal, like the last light cloud in the clear sky, like the fleeting ringing sound in the deep valley. In order to catch it, my nostrils twitched twice. "Do you like this perfume?" Lin Yun said, looking at me with a smile. Oh, isn't it forbidden to use perfume in the army?" I asked stupidly. "Sometimes." She started the car with that touching smile. I became interested in a small ornament hanging on the car window. It was a piece of bamboo, with 2 sections, as thick as fingers, and a branch, with a nice shape and charm. I was interested because the bamboo sections and leaves were completely withered and yellow, and the dry air in the north had cracked several thin cracks on the bamboo sections, which was obviously very old. She still hung it in such a prominent position, and there might be a story in the bamboo. I reached out and wanted to take it down to take a closer look, but Lin Yun grabbed my wrist. Her hands were slender and white, but surprisingly strong. But after she pressed my hand down, the strength quickly disappeared, leaving only the softness and warmth that made my heart beat. "That's a landmine," she said calmly. I looked at her in surprise, then at the piece of bamboo that seemed absolutely harmless, in disbelief. "It's an anti-personnel mine. It has a very simple structure. The lower section is filled with explosives, and the upper section is filled with a trigger fuse. The trigger fuse is actually a small flexible firing pin and a rubber band. When the bamboo is stepped on, it deforms and the firing pin bounces off. Where did this come from? It was captured on the front line in Guangxi in the early 1980s. It's a classic creation. Its cost is as low as that of a firecracker, but its lethality is huge. And because it has very little metal, ordinary mine detectors can't detect it, which gives engineers a headache. Its appearance is concealed, so when it's deployed, it doesn't need to be buried, it can just be scattered on the ground. At that time, the Vietnamese army deployed tens of thousands of mines in one go. I can't believe that something this small can kill someone. It usually won't kill a person, but it can certainly blow off half a foot or a calf. In terms of reducing the enemy's fighting power, this kind of weapon that causes injury is more efficient than a weapon that causes death. This beautiful girl who touched my heart just calmly talked about bloodshed and death, just like other girls of the same age discussing cosmetics, and I felt very uncomfortable. But who can tell clearly whether this is an indispensable part of her beauty that touched my heart? Can it still explode? I asked, pointing at the bamboo. It should be possible, but after so many years, the rubber band that pushes the firing pin may have aged. I was shocked. What? You mean it? It also? Yes, it's still in the cocked state, and the firing pin is taut, so it can't be touched. This is too dangerous, I said in fear, staring at the bamboo swaying on the car window. Lin Yun stared calmly ahead with his clear eyes. After a long while, he said softly, I like this feeling. Are you interested in weapons? Lin Yun asked me, perhaps just to break the awkward silence. I was interested in it when I was a kid. My eyes lit up when I saw weapons. Most boys are like this. Let's talk less about weapons. Do you know what it feels like for a man to ask a woman for advice on weapons? Don't you think they have a kind of extraordinary beauty? She pointed at the bamboo thunder. What an exquisite work of art. I admit that weapons do have an indescribable beauty, but this beauty is based on killing people. If this bamboo is just a bamboo, that beauty will be gone. Have you ever wondered why killing, the most cruel act of all, can bring beauty? This is indeed a very profound question, and I am not good at thinking in this area. The car turned onto a very narrow road, and Lin Yun continued. In fact, the beauty of a thing can be completely separated from its actual function. For example, stamps. In the eyes of stamp collectors, their actual function is irrelevant. So for you, is the purpose of developing weapons for their beauty or for their practical function? As soon as I said this, I immediately felt that my question was too abrupt. Lin Yun smiled again instead of answering. Many aspects of her were a mystery to me. You are the kind of person whose entire life is occupied by something. Lin Yun said. Do not you? Yeah, that's right. We were silent after that. The car stopped after passing through an orchard. The mountain range that seemed far away just now was now in sight. At the foot of the mountain, there was an area surrounded by iron fences. Most of it was open space with some residual grass. In one corner, there was a small building complex. The building complex consisted of a wide-roofed building that looked like a large warehouse and 3 four-story buildings. 2 military helicopters were parked in front of the building. I remembered that the video of the ball lightning witness was filmed here. This is the test base for lightning weapons. In sharp contrast to the new concept building, this one is heavily guarded. In one of the buildings, we met the person in charge of the base, a senior colonel of the Air Force named Su Wanqing, who looked very honest. When Lin Yun introduced his name, I knew that this person in charge was one of the scientists in China who specialized in lightning research. I often saw his papers in domestic and foreign academic journals. I was familiar with his name, but I had never met him, and I didn't know he was a soldier. The colonel said to Lin Yun, Shaolin, people are urging us to close the stall again. Please work harder up there. I observed that his attitude toward Lin Yun was not like that of a superior toward a subordinate, but was more cautious and polite. Lin Yun shook her head and said, With the result we have, we can't say anything. We have to persevere. Her tone did not sound like a subordinate speaking to a superior. This is not a matter of persistence. Now there are people in the General Armaments Department supporting us, but it won't last long. We at New Concept are also trying to come up with something as soon as possible, at least in theory. This is Dr. Chun from the Lightning Research Institute. The colonel shook my hand enthusiastically and said, If our 2 companies had cooperated earlier, things might not be the way they are now. What we are showing you today is something new to anyone who is doing lightning research. At this moment, the brightness of the lights in the room suddenly increased a lot. It seems that some high-energy consumption equipment has just stopped. The colonel obviously noticed this and said, "It seems that it has been charged. Xiaolin, you take Dr. Chun to see it. I won't accompany you. In your words, I still have to stick to it. After that, you go to the Lightning Institute in person to contact them and establish a relationship between our two sides. I know their former director Xue, but he has retired now. Like us, the results he produced cannot be transformed." On the way in, I noticed that there were well-equipped laboratories and processing workshops, which was another obvious difference between this place and the new concept. This was obviously a place where real work was done. Lin Yun said, "Our lightning weapon research is divided into two parts. We will first look at the first part, an airborne ground attack system." As we walked out of the building, we saw a pilot and another operator heading toward the helicopter, and two other men were picking up a thick cable that had just been unplugged from somewhere on the plane, which ran all the way to another building. A few soldiers were loading a bunch of waste oil drums onto a truck. It was obvious that the people here had been idle for a long time, so they were very excited now. Lin Yun took me to a bunker built with sandbags. In the middle of a football field-sized open space in front, several soldiers were unloading waste oil barrels from trucks and piling them in a red square area in the shape of a small house. The roar of the engine was heard in the distance. In the dust stirred up by the propeller, the helicopter slowly rose, the rotor slightly tilted, and flew over the pile of waste oil barrels. It flew over the target and hovered for a few seconds. A bright lightning appeared from the belly of the helicopter and hit the pile of waste oil barrels. Almost at the same time, a sharp thunderclap sounded, which caught me off guard and frightened me. The thunder was followed by several dull bangs, and the waste oil barrels with residual gasoline in them exploded and burned. I stared at the black smoke wrapped in dark red flames, deeply shocked, and asked after a long time, "What energy do you use to generate lightning?" "The energy source of this system has nothing to do with us. It is the result of the Institute of Superconductivity of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. It is a high-energy battery made of room-temperature superconducting materials. The principle of this superconducting battery is actually very simple. It is to let the current rotate endlessly in a large circle of superconducting wire. It can store a lot of electrical energy." At this time, the helicopter began to discharge electricity to the ground again, this time for a long time, but the intensity was very weak. A thin arc connected the helicopter to the ground, and the long arc twisted in the air, like a dancer's graceful curve, or like a purple spider's silk in the wind. This is a superconducting battery continuously releasing its surplus electrical energy at a low intensity. This type of battery is very unstable and has poor safety. It cannot be charged or stored under normal circumstances. Let's wait a moment. This will take at least 10 minutes. Doesn't this sound good? The discharge was not loud. It was like scratching glass with fingernails, giving people goosebumps. I asked, "How many times can a high-intensity instantaneous discharge, like the one just now, be repeated?" "That depends on the capacity and quantity of the superconducting battery. For example, this helicopter can do 8 to 10 times, but we can't discharge the surplus energy in that way." "Why?" "People will protest." Lin Yun pointed to the north. I saw a luxurious villa area not far from the base. The base should have been built far away from the city, but for various reasons it was built here. You will see later that the consequences of this mistake are far more than just noise nuisance. The remaining electricity was discharged. Lin Yun took me to see the equipment on the helicopter. I was not familiar with mechanics and electronics, so I didn't quite understand it, but I was deeply impressed by the cylindrical superconducting battery. "How can you say this system is unsuccessful?" I asked, inwardly marveling at what I had just seen. Captain Yang is an attack helicopter pilot of the 38th Army Aviation Regiment. He is the most qualified to draw conclusions. I thought of the ball lightning witness, but this one was obviously younger. He said, "I was really excited when I first saw this thing. At that time, I felt that its significance could not be overstated. It would greatly improve the ground attack capability of armed helicopters. In short, I was as excited as the pilots in World War I saw today's missiles, but I soon realized that this was just a toy." "Why?" First of all, the range should not exceed 100 meters, otherwise the electricity will not be released. 100 meters, a grenade can be thrown that far. Lin Yun said, "We tried our best, but this is the limit of our range. This should be easy to understand. To produce the arc of several thousand meters long like natural lightning, the energy of superconducting batteries is far from enough. Even if this energy can be generated through some channels such as nuclear reactions, existing weapon platforms such as armed helicopters and destroyers cannot withstand such a large energy emission. They may destroy themselves first when emitting lightning." The captain said, "There is another point that is even more ridiculous. Let Dr. Lin say it himself." Lin Yun said to me, "You may have thought of it." This time I thought, "Maybe you mean the other pole of the discharge?" "Yes." Lin Yun pointed to the red square area in the distance where the burning waste oil barrel was placed. "We pre-charged the red area with a negative charge of 1.5 coulombs. I thought about it. Could it be possible to remotely charge a target area using something like radiation? That's what we thought about it at the beginning, and the long-distance static charging equipment was developed at the same time as this set of discharge equipment, but it is very difficult technically, especially in actual combat conditions. To effectively strike a moving target, it is necessary to complete the static charging process of the target area within about 1 second, which is almost impossible to do under the existing technical conditions." Lin Yun sighed as the captain said, "We made a toy. It's okay to perform a show to scare people, but it has no practical value." Next, Lin Yun took me to the next project. "This might be what you're most interested in," she said, "creating lightning in the atmosphere." We walked into the tall, wide-roofed building, which Lin Yun told me was converted from a large warehouse. A row of floodlights on the high dome illuminated the vast space, and our footsteps echoed, and Lin Yun's voice also produced a pleasant echo. The common lightning produced by thunderstorm clouds is difficult to generate artificially on a large scale and has little military value. Our research goal is to produce dry lightning, which is lightning formed by the electric field discharge generated by the charged air in the atmosphere and has nothing to do with clouds. You said that when you were at Tarzan. Lin Yun showed me 2 machines installed against the wall. Each of them was the size of a truck. The main part was a high-pressure airbag, which looked like a large air compressor. This is a charged air generator. It sucks in a lot of air, charges it, and then discharges it. The 2 machines generate positively and negatively charged air respectively. I saw a thick tube coming out of each generator, placed on the ground against the wall, and a thin tube vertically extended from the thick tube at a certain distance. There were hundreds of thin tubes in total, which were fixed vertically on the high wall in a row, leading to 2 rows of outlets, one high and one low. Lin Yun told me that the 2 rows of nozzles respectively sprayed out air with positive and negative charges, forming a discharge electric field in the atmosphere. At this time, I saw someone using a pulley to hoist a small model airplane to the height between the 2 rows of nozzles. Lin Yun said, "That's the target we want to destroy. We're using the cheapest kind, which can only fly in a straight line." After a tour, Lin Yun took me into a small room in the corner of the building. This small room was actually an iron cage with glass inlays and a dashboard inside. Lin Yun said, "Lightning usually doesn't hit here, but for safety reasons, we built a shielded control room, which is actually a Faraday cage." She handed me a small plastic bag with a pair of earplugs in it. "The sound is very loud. Not wearing earplugs will cause damage to your hearing." Seeing that I was wearing earplugs, Lin Yun pressed a red button on the console. The 2 machines roared, and the 2 rows of nozzles on the high wall spewed out red and blue mist respectively. Under the illumination of the floodlights on the dome, a very strange scene was formed. Lin Yun said, "The charged air is originally colorless, but this is done so that it can be seen clearly. The way to charge the air is to add a large number of charged aerosol particles into it. The red and blue air accumulated more and more, forming 2 even layers above us. There was a red number on the instrument panel jumping." Lin Yun told me that this showed the strength of the electric field being formed. A few minutes later, the buzzer screamed, indicating that the electric field strength had reached the preset value. Lin Yun pressed another button, and the small plane that had just been hoisted flew out. When it flew to the middle of the red and blue air layer, a flash of lightning appeared. The brightness of the lightning was so high that my eyes were dazzled. At the same time, I heard a thunderclap. Although I was wearing earplugs, the loud noise was still thrilling. After my vision was restored, I saw that the small plane had turned into a bunch of small pieces, falling down like a handful of shredded paper scattered by an invisible hand. At the last position where the small plane arrived, a cloud of yellow smoke was gradually spreading. I stared at all this and asked, was it that little plane that triggered the lightning? Yes, we have made the atmospheric electric field reach a critical point. When a conductor of a certain size enters the electric field, lightning will be triggered. It's like a minefield in the air. Have you conducted any outdoor experiments? We have conducted many experiments, but I cannot demonstrate them to you. It takes a lot of effort to conduct such an experiment. The pipes for releasing charged air in the outdoor atmosphere are suspended in the air by tethered balloons. Each balloon has two pipes, one high and one low, which release positively and negatively charged air respectively. When establishing an atmospheric electric field, dozens or even hundreds of such balloons are lined up in a row, forming two rows of high and low nozzles to form positively and negatively charged air layers in the air. Of course, this is just an experimental system. In actual combat, other release methods may be adopted, such as release from an aircraft or from a rocket on the ground. I thought about it and said, the atmosphere outside is not static. Air currents will blow away the charged air layer. This is indeed a big problem. The initial consideration was to use the method of continuous release in the upwind belt to form a dynamic and stable atmospheric electric field above the target to be defended. What are the actual test results? It was basically successful, and it was because of that success that the accident happened. What's going on? Before conducting the atmospheric lightning test, we fully considered the safety issue. We only conducted the test when the wind direction was safe. The stability of the atmospheric electric field established in the test sometimes exceeded our expectations and was blown a long distance by the wind. During the test, there were continuous reports of thunder and lightning in sunny days in the downwind area of the base, and the farthest one occurred in Zhangjiago area. However, these lightning did not cause any damage, because its impact was only equivalent to a small thunderstorm. Most wind directions are safe, and we don't think there is any special danger even in the wind direction facing the city, but there is one exception, the wind direction facing the capital airport. This atmospheric electric field is particularly dangerous to aircraft because, unlike thunderclouds, it is invisible to pilots and ground radars. To increase visibility, we colored the charged air like the indoor test you just saw, but later found that the colored air would separate from the charged air during long-distance drift. At the same time, the colored air, unlike the charged air filled with aerosol-heavy ions, diffuses very quickly and its color disappears quickly. Before each test, we repeatedly verified the wind direction data with the Air Force and local meteorological departments. We also set up a special meteorological team for this purpose. Even so, we still could not predict the sudden change in wind direction. In the 12th test, the wind direction suddenly changed after the electric field was built, and the atmospheric electric field drifted towards the capital airport. At that time, the airport was closed urgently, and we sent 5 helicopters to track the drifting electric field. This was very difficult and dangerous because the colored air in the electric field quickly dissipated and could only be located based on the changes in the size of the interference noise in the airborne radio. One of the helicopters mistakenly entered the electric field, induced lightning, and exploded in the air after being hit. The captain who died was the witness of the ball lightning you wanted to meet. The young pilot emerged clearly in my mind. In recent years, whenever I heard someone died from lightning, I felt an inexplicable fear in my heart, and now this fear is even stronger. Looking at the red and blue mist suspended in the air, my scalp tightened. Can this electric field be eliminated? I asked. It's easy, Lin Yun said, pressing a green button, and the 2 rows of nozzles immediately sprayed out colorless gas, and the charge was being neutralized. Lin Yun pointed to the red light number indicating the electric field strength, which was decreasing rapidly. But I was still nervous. I felt the invisible electric field everywhere. The space around me was being stretched tight like a rubber band, about to break. I had difficulty breathing. Let's go out, I suggested to Lin Yun. When we got outside, I could breathe more easily. This thing is terrible, I said. Lin Yun did not notice my abnormality and said, terrible? No, It is just a failed system. We overlooked a very important point. We repeatedly measured the relationship curve between the volume, intensity, and amount of charged air required for the electric field, and the result was very optimistic at the time. But this relationship curve was measured in a small range indoors, and is not suitable for a large range of space in the external atmosphere. In the latter, to establish a large-scale atmospheric electric field that meets the requirements, the amount of charged air required increases exponentially. To maintain the atmospheric electric field for a long time by continuously releasing charged air, an extremely large system is required. Even if economic factors are not considered, such a system itself becomes a target that is easily destroyed in wartime. Now you can see that both of our experimental systems have failed, or in other words, they have achieved partial success in technology but have no practical value. As for the reasons for their failure, I think you should have a deeper understanding. What? I said blankly, not paying attention to what she had just said. You should see that the reasons for the failure of both systems are substantial. The problems lie in the technical basis of the system, and it is difficult to solve them through improvement. We have now concluded that there is no hope for these two systems. Well, maybe, I answered absent-mindedly. The red and blue electric field, the bright lightning, the fragments of the small plane, the burning waste oil barrel still flashing in front of my eyes. So, we should come up with a new lightning weapon system. You can definitely guess what it is. The atmospheric electric field floating in the wind, the face of the captain pilot, the exploding helicopter. Ball lightning, she exclaimed. I was suddenly awakened and found that we had crossed the open space and walked to the gate of the test base. I stopped and stared at Lin Yun blankly. If this kind of lightning can really be artificially generated, its potential is unmatched by the previous two systems. It has incredibly precise selectivity for its target and can be accurate to a certain page of a book. This is a feature that no other weapon system has. Another very important point is that it is not affected by air currents. Did you see how the lightning struck the captain's helicopter? I interrupted her and asked. She was stunned for a moment and shook her head. No one saw it. The fuselage was blown into pieces. We only found some scattered debris. Have you seen how other people were killed by lightning? She shook her head again. Then you have never seen how people are killed by ball lightning. She looked at me with concern and said, "Are you feeling unwell?" "But I've seen it," I said, trying my best to control the cramps in my stomach. "I've seen how ball lightning kills people, and it killed my parents. I watched them burn to ashes in an instant, and then the human-shaped ashes collapsed to the ground when I touched them lightly. I didn't even tell the police about it at the time. They wrote missing in my parents' case files. For so many years, I kept it deep in my heart and never told anyone. 2 years ago on Mount Tai, on Tian Street late at night, I told you about it. I didn't expect you to get such a revelation from it." Lin Yun seemed flustered. "Please listen to my explanation. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm really sorry. It's okay. I will report what I learned today and your cooperation intention to my leader when I return. But personally, I have no interest in lightning weapons." On the way back to the city, Lin Yun and I remained silent. I never realized you were so sensitive before. After returning to the institute, Galbo was very dissatisfied with me. He didn't know about my past experiences, and I didn't want to tell him. But what you know is still very valuable. I also learned from other channels that the military has indeed stopped research on lightning weapons, but this is only a temporary suspension. Judging from their investment in the first two test systems, this research is still very important. They are looking for new breakthroughs, and ball lightning is indeed a good idea. This research requires a greater investment, and it is difficult for the military and us to fully launch it in a short period of time, but we can make theoretical preparations first. I can't give you money for this project now, but I can give you time and energy. You can come up with a few mathematical models from different theoretical angles and boundary conditions. In this way, when the conditions are met, we can test all promising mathematical models together. Of course, the first thing to do is to finalize the cooperation with the military. I shook my head and said, "I don't want to make weapons. I didn't expect you were a pacifist. I'm nothing. Not that complicated. I just don't want to see ball lightning burn people to ashes anymore." "So you want to see someone burn us to ashes one day?" I said, "It's not that complicated. Everyone has their own mental minefields, And I don't want to touch this minefield, that's all. Galbo smiled slyly. The nature of ball lightning determines that its research will eventually be related to weapons. Are you just going to abandon something you vowed to pursue your whole life? I suddenly realized this and was speechless. After work, I went back to the dormitory and lay down on the bed. My mind was blank. Then someone knocked on the door, and when I opened the door, it was Lin Yun. She was dressed like a college student, and she looked younger than when she was in military uniform. "I'm so sorry about yesterday," she said, and she seemed sincere. "I should be the one to say sorry," I said awkwardly. "It's completely understandable that you would be disgusted by my ideas after such a terrible experience, but for the sake of the cause, we can only make ourselves strong. Lin Yun, we don't seem to be on the same path in our careers." "Don't say that. All the major scientific advances of this century, such as aerospace, nuclear energy, computers, etc., are the result of scientists and soldiers, two groups of people with different paths, putting their common goals together. The commonality of our goals is obvious: artificially producing ball lightning, but it is the end for you and just the beginning for me. I am not here to explain my purpose to you this time. It is difficult for us to understand each other in this regard. I am just here to help you reduce some of your aversion to lightning weapons. Then give it a try. Okay, when it comes to lightning weapons, the first thing you think of is killing people, or in our words, destroying the enemy's manpower. But if you think about it carefully, you will find that even if lightning weapons are completely successfully manufactured, their ability in this regard is no stronger than that of conventional weapons. If they attack large metal targets, a Faraday cage effect will be produced, which will shield the lightning and partially or completely eliminate the lethality to the people inside. So for life, lightning weapons are not as cruel as they seem. On the contrary, it may be a weapon system that wins at the lowest cost of enemy life. How do you understand this? What are the targets that lightning weapons can cause the greatest destructive power to? Electronic systems. When the intensity of the electromagnetic pulse caused by lightning exceeds 2.4 Gauss, the integrated circuit will be permanently damaged. Even when the intensity exceeds 0.07 Gauss, it will interfere with the operation of the microcomputer. The transient electromagnetic pulse caused by lightning has a devastating impact, which is why lightning weapons have attracted attention. The potential of ball lightning in this regard is even more unusual. Its extremely precise selectivity in striking targets makes it possible for this weapon to destroy all the integrated circuits in the enemy's weapon system without touching any other parts. Under modern conditions, if all the integrated circuit blocks in the enemy's weapon system are melted, the war will be over. What she said. I think your disgust has diminished a little. Next, I will help you see your goal more clearly. Ball lightning research does not belong to basic science. Weapon systems are its only possible application at present. If it is separated from weapon research, who would be willing to invest in this project? You don't believe that ball lightning can be created with just a pencil and a piece of paper, do you? But now, we still have to rely on pencil and paper. I told her Galbo's idea. So we can work together? She jumped up from her chair happily. I have to admire your ability to persuade people. It's a job requirement. New concepts require us to convince people to accept our seemingly bizarre ideas every day. In terms of lightning weapons, we successfully convinced the General Armament Department, but so far, we have been disappointing them. I see your difficulty. Now it's not just a problem. The lightning weapon project has been cancelled. We can only fight alone now. As you and Director Gao said, we should make theoretical preparations. There will definitely be opportunities in the future. The temptation of this weapon system is too great. I don't believe they will stop here. You haven't eaten yet? Come on, I'll treat you. We walked into a dimly lit restaurant with few people and a piano playing softly. The military environment seems to be suitable for you, I said after sitting down. Maybe. I grew up in the army. I looked at her carefully in the dim light and gradually focused my attention on her brooch, which was the only ornament on her body. It was in the shape of a matchstick-length sword with a pair of small wings on the hilt. The entire brooch was silver, and it shone with a silvery light in the dim light, like a star on her collar. Do you think it looks good? Lin Yun asked me as he looked down at the brooch. I nodded and said she was beautiful, but I felt very embarrassed. Just like the perfume incident yesterday, She immediately noticed my attention to her. It was also my fault that my social circle was very small before, and I was not used to being alone with the opposite love, let alone their delicacy and sensitivity. But thinking about this kind of feminine quality reflected in a girl driving a car equipped with landmines really gives people a wonderful feeling. Then I realized that the beautiful brooch was something that frightened me just as much as the piece of bamboo. Lin Yun took off her brooch, held the hilt of the sword in her hand, and with her other hand picked up a fork and a spoon on the dining table. She put the fork and spoon together and stood them up, then gently slashed across them with the sword. To my horror, the metal handles of the spoon and fork were cut cleanly in the middle, as if they were made of wax. This is a silicon material produced using molecular arrangement technology. Its blade is only a few molecules thick. It is the sharpest sword in the world. I carefully took the brooch she handed me, looked at it carefully under the light, and found that the tip of the sword was almost transparent. It's too dangerous for you to wear this thing. I like this feeling, just like the Inuit like the cold. They can make people's minds run at high speed and give birth to inspiration. The Inuit don't like the cold, they just have no choice. You are really special. She nodded. I feel that myself. You like weapons, you like danger, but what about war? Do you like it? From the current situation, war is no longer a question of whether we like it or not. She skillfully avoided my questions. I know that she is far from opening her heart to me, and maybe there will never be that day. But we got along very well and had a lot to talk about. Lin Yun's thoughts were as sharp as that little sword, often piercing me and making me gasp. Her calmness and rationality were something I had never seen in other women, but she never revealed her family background to me. Once this aspect was brought up, she would carefully change the subject. I only knew that her parents were both soldiers. Before we knew it, it was 2 o'clock in the morning. The candles on the chandelier on our table had almost burned out, and we were the only ones left in the restaurant. The waiter came over and asked us what song we wanted to listen to, which was obviously in order to leave. I'm trying to find a lesser-known piece, and if I can't play it, maybe we can stay a little longer. The passage from the 1001 Nights Suite about Sinbad's voyage, I forget what it's called. The waiter shook his head awkwardly and asked us to focus on one song. Lin Yun said to the waiter, 4 Seasons, please. Then he said to me, you will definitely like summer, which is the season with thunder and lightning. We continued our conversation to the melody of 4 Seasons, and the topic was much lighter than before. She said, I can now confirm that you have never talked to the most beautiful girl in the class. Yes. I remembered the library night and the beautiful girl in class who asked me what I was looking for, but I couldn't remember the girl's name after thinking for a long time. When the 4 Seasons was finished, it was finally time to leave. Lin Yun smiled and asked me to wait. I will play the 1001 Nights for you. She sat down at the piano, and Korsakov's music, which had accompanied me through countless lonely nights, floated up like a spring night breeze. Watching her slender and soft fingers dancing on the keys, it suddenly occurred to me that I had requested this piece of music just now because this place was like a harbor. A beautiful major was using music to tell me about Sinbad's voyage, about storms and calm seas, about princesses, fairies, monsters, and gems, and about palm trees and beaches under the setting sun. On the table in front of me, in the dying candlelight, lay her sharpest sword in the world. I started counting angels on the tip of the needle again, but this time Lin Yun counted with me. In the process of establishing the mathematical model, I found that Lin Yun's mathematical ability was not as good as mine, but her knowledge was very broad and she had a deep understanding of many sciences, which was required by her major. She was very good at computers, and all the mathematical models were turned into programs by her. Her program had a visual output of results. If the model was mathematically successful, a 3-dimensional ball lightning would appear on the screen, with its fine internal structure clearly visible. The energy release process when it disappeared was also clearly shown in slow motion. By changing the screen, you could also observe its motion trajectory in a 3-dimensional coordinate system. Compared with the dry data tables and curves output by my previous program, this was far more than a matter of intuition and beauty. In the past, when the data came out, it had to go through a time-consuming and tedious non-system to know whether the model was successful, but now all these things are done automatically by the computer. This software has brought about a qualitative change in our theoretical research on ball lightning. Ball lightning. It's like a composition. You just need to build a system that conforms to the laws of physics and is mathematically autonomous, so that the energy constrained by electromagnetic force forms a stable sphere and satisfies the characteristics of ball lightning known so far. But it's not easy to do this. An astronomer once said something very interesting. If stars don't really exist, it would be easy to prove that they can't exist. This also applies to ball lightning. It's crazy to imagine a mechanism that can confine electromagnetic waves traveling at the speed of light in such a small ball. But if there is enough patience and the enthusiasm of being obsessed with a dead end, such writing models can still be established. As for whether they can withstand experimental verification is another matter. In fact, I am almost certain that they will not succeed in experiments. The several mathematical models we have completed only mathematically show some of the characteristics of ball lightning. Some characteristics may not be shown in one model, but appear easily in another model, but none of them can show all the known characteristics. In addition to the imprisoned electromagnetic waves mentioned above, another most mysterious characteristic is the selectivity of ball lightning when releasing energy. In the computer, the virtual ball lightning generated by the learning aid model is like a bomb. When it hits an object or releases energy on its own, it will turn everything around it into ashes. Every time I see these, my mind appears with the burnt books on the intact bookshelf, the cooked seafood in the equally intact refrigerator, my burnt underwear under the intact jacket, and the cold stool that my parents sat on before they were burned to ashes. But the most deeply engraved in my memory is the notebook with burnt pages that Zhang Bin showed me. It is the most arrogant display of some mysterious power which ruthlessly destroys our confidence. I work at the Lightning Research Institute most of the time, but sometimes I also go to New Concept. Most of Lin Yun's colleagues and friends are male soldiers. Even in her spare time, I rarely see her with female friends. Those young officers belong to the high-level intellectual class that is expanding rapidly in the current military. They all have a masculinity that is rarely seen in today's society. This makes me always feel inferior in front of them, especially when Lin Yun discusses military specialties that I know nothing about with them very enthusiastically. This inferiority complex becomes even stronger. The naval colonel in the photo on Lin Yun's desk is an outstanding representative of them. I met Colonel Jiang Xingqian, which means Lin Yun has known him for quite some time. He looks younger than in the photo, probably in his 30s. It is definitely rare to see such a young colonel. Jiang Xingqian, captain of the USS Everest. Lin Yun introduced him to me. She called him by his first name, and the brief glances they exchanged confirmed their relationship. Dr. Chin, Lin Yun has told me about you and your ball lightning many times. As he spoke, his eyes looked directly at me gently. There was a sincerity in his eyes that made me feel very comfortable. This was indeed different from what I had imagined a captain of an aircraft carrier to be. The first time I saw Jiang Xingqian, I realized that it was meaningless to compete with him. Unlike the urban men who were used to showing off their strength in front of potential competitors, he tried to hide his strength at all times. This was a kind gesture, fearing that this strength would hurt people like me. He seemed to be saying, "I'm really sorry for making you feel inferior in front of her. This was not intentional. Let's change this situation together. For your aircraft carrier, each of us ordinary people has to pay an average tax of 10 yuan. I tried to make myself feel relaxed, but when the words came out of my mouth, I found that they were so clumsy. This does not include carrier-based aircraft and escort cruisers, so every time we set sail, we are like carrying it on our shoulders," he said seriously, once again successfully relieving my tension. After meeting Jiang Xingqian, I was not as depressed as I imagined. Instead, I felt like a burden had been lifted off my shoulders. Lin Yun has become a beautiful little world in my heart. I admire that world and go there to rest when I am physically and mentally exhausted, but I am very careful to avoid falling into it. Something separates our hearts. That thing cannot be expressed in words, but I am clearly aware of its existence. To me, Lin Yun is like the miniature sword she wears on her chest, crystal clear and beautiful but sharp and dangerous. After building several mathematical models, I gradually found my way around it. The newly constructed models increasingly reflected the known characteristics of ball lightning. At the same time, the amount of calculation required by the models also increased. Sometimes, my 3G-based P4 computer had to run for several days to complete a simulation. Lin Yun built a system in New Concept that used 18 computers to calculate separately and finally aggregated the results, greatly improving efficiency. When I finally completed a mathematical model that can show all the known characteristics of ball lightning, Lin Yun's long-term worry happened. This time, after she got the mathematical model, she did not immediately program it, but spent several days estimating its computational complexity. When she got the result, she sighed. "We are in trouble," she said. With the computational complexity of this model, it would take about 500,000 hours to complete a simulation on a single existing microcomputer. I was shocked. That's more than 50 years? Yes. According to past experience, each model needs to be debugged many times before it can be run. According to the complexity of the current model, the number of debugging times may be even higher. In this way, the time we can tolerate to complete a simulation is within 10 days. I estimated in my mind. This would require nearly 2,000 microcomputers to calculate simultaneously. So we started looking for a mainframe computer, but it was not easy. Neither the Lightning Institute nor New Concept had a mainframe computer. The largest machine was the Alpha server. The military's mainframe computers were busy and had strict restrictions. Since our research was not approved by the military, Lin Yun had tried many times but was not allowed to use it. So we could only pin our hopes on civilian mainframe computers. Lin Yun and I had no way to do this, so we had to ask Galbo to find a solution. Galbo was in a bad situation. As soon as he took office, he transformed the institute from a public institution into an enterprise and pushed it into the market. At the same time, he laid off a large number of employees through competitive recruitment. Because he was too impulsive and not cautious enough, and did not understand the national conditions and people's feelings, the relationship between the upper and lower levels became very tense. In business was even worse. After he took office, he used the main force of the institute to develop new lightning protection and elimination devices. These devices are very different from conventional lightning protection devices. They include semiconductor lightning eliminators, optimized lightning rods, laser lightning induction devices, rocket lightning induction devices, and water column lightning induction devices. At this time, it happened to coincide with the academic discussion held by the Overvoltage and Insulation Coordination Subcommittee of the High Voltage Committee of the Chinese Society of Electrical Engineering. The topic was new lightning protection and elimination devices. The minutes published at the end of the meeting believed that theory and practice had failed to prove that such products had better performance than conventional direct lightning protection devices, and there were still many problems to be studied and solved. Therefore, such unconventional direct lightning protection products should not be used in engineering. Due to the authority and influence of the organization, the views of the meeting must be adopted by the national lightning protection engineering specifications being formulated. So the things being developed would completely lose the market and the huge investment would be wasted. When I talked to Galbo about the mainframe, he was also talking to me, asking me to put the ball lightning research on hold for the time being and concentrate on developing a new lightning location system for power systems, and at the same time complete the lightning protection engineering design for the Capitol Grand Theater. Naturally, the mainframe business would be out of the question, and even the ball lightning research itself could only be done as an amateur. Lin Yun and I conducted some other visual studies, but we did not expect that in this age when computers have become a necessity, mainframe computers are so rare. "We are lucky," Lin Yun said, "compared with the supercomputing projects in the world today. Our calculations are nothing. I just read a document about the nuclear test simulation of the U.S. Department of Energy. Their current computing power of 12 trillion times per second is far from meeting the needs of simulating a nuclear test. They are currently building a cluster system that includes up to 12,000 ALPHAPOW RED processors. It can reach a computing speed of 100 trillion times per second. Our computing capacity is still within the normal range, and we should be able to find a solution." Lin Yunzhong acted like a soldier, moving forward unwaveringly no matter how great the difficulties were, and at the same time trying to reduce my stress by downplaying the difficulties, which is what I should have done for her. I said, "The digital simulation of ball lightning is similar to the simulation of nuclear tests. Both simulate an energy evolution process. In some ways, The former is more complicated, so we will reach that computational capacity sooner or later. But even now, I don't see any solution for us. In the next few days, I concentrated on taking over the lightning location system handed over by Gaobo and did not contact Lin Yun. One day I received a call from her, and she told me a website and asked me to check it out. Her tone was very excited. I opened the web page and saw that its background was the black of space. The title was The Earth Floating in the Purple Radio Waves, and the name of the web page was SETI at Home, which is the abbreviation of Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence in Your Home. Actually, I have known about this thing for a long time. It is a huge experiment designed to use the idle power of thousands of computers connected to the internet to search for extraterrestrial civilizations. SETI at Home is a special screensaver that helps search for extraterrestrial civilizations by analyzing data obtained by Arecibo, the world's largest radio telescope. But when a large amount of data comes in front of us, a supercomputer becomes a necessary device to search for the required information from it, but it costs a lot of money to do it. Scientists who are not well off have come up with a temporary solution. Instead of using a huge computer, it is better to share this heavy work with more small computers. Every day, the data received by Arecibo will be recorded on high-density digital tapes and transmitted back to the research base at the University of California. Then the data will be broken down into work units of 0.25 megabits in size, and then sent to different personal computers by the main server of SETI at Home. All netizens around the world have to do is to go to the project's website to download and install a special screensaver software. In this way, when people finish work and take a break, the screensaver starts running. This seemingly resting computer has actually joined the ranks of searching for aliens, receiving and analyzing data from SETI at Home that has been broken down into work units. After the analysis work is completed, the system will automatically connect online and transmit the analysis results back to the main server, and then receive another new work unit. I downloaded a screensaver from this website and started it. Its background was also black, and the lower half was a display of the signal received by the radio telescope in a three-dimensional coordinate system. It looked like a bird's-eye view of a super city composed of countless skyscrapers, which was very spectacular. In the upper left corner, a rapidly changing waveform was displayed. This was the part of the signal being analyzed, and there was also a percentage of completion. I saw that it had been operating for 5 minutes, and only 0.01% had been completed. Great! I clapped my hands and exclaimed, causing the other people in the office to look at me in amazement. I was ashamed of myself that the scientists there, who had more funding than us, could come up with such a creative and frugal solution when faced with the same problem as us. I immediately went to New Concept, and when I saw Lin Yun in front of the computer, as expected, she was making a homepage. The next thing to do was to divide the mathematical model that needed to be calculated into 2,000 parallel computing units. This was a heavy task and took us half a month. Then we connected these units to the screensaver program and put them on the homepage. Network programming was more complicated than SETI at Home because data had to be transmitted between computing units. Finally, we uploaded the homepage and waited for the results with hope. 3 days later, we found that we were a little too optimistic. Fewer than 50 people visited the page, and only 4 downloaded the screensaver. There were 2 messages on the guest book, both of which were sanctimonious warnings against pseudoscience. There is only one way now, Lin Yun said. Switch the data we want to calculate and upload it to the SETI at Home server. It is not difficult to break into their server. In this way, a large number of computers that have downloaded their screensaver program will work for us and, according to the settings in the program, let them pass the results to us. I didn't object. I found that when you want something, moral constraints are powerless. But I still came up with an excuse. There are more than 100,000 computers working for them now. We only need 2,000 of them. After we finish the work, we will leave. It won't have any impact on them. In fact, Lin Yun didn't need to comfort herself like me. She connected her computer to the internet and started working quickly. Seeing her familiarity, I couldn't imagine what she had done on the internet before. 2 days later, she successfully uploaded our data and program to the SETI at Home server. Later I learned that the server was located at the University of Berkeley. From this incident, I understand that Lin Yun has much fewer moral constraints than I do, and she can do whatever it takes to achieve her goals. Only 2 days later, The 2,000 screensavers on our SETI at home server were taken away, and the calculation results began to flow into our server. Over the past few days, Lin Yun and I often spent hours looking at the ever-increasing data on the computer, imagining the scene of 2,000 computers scattered around the Earth working for us. We were intoxicated. But on the 8th day, I turned on my computer at the Thunder Institute and logged into the new concept server. I found that the calculation results had stopped being sent back. The last thing that came back was a text file with the following content. We are doing the greatest cause of mankind with the smallest funds, but we are being harassed in such a shameful way. You should be ashamed of yourself. Norton Parker, SETI at Home project director. I felt like I had fallen into an ice cave. I was so disheartened that I didn't even bother to call Lin Yun, but she called me first. I know, but that's not why I'm here. She responded to my question. Look at the guest book on our old website. I opened our homepage and saw another English message added to the guest book. I know what you are calculating, BL. Stop wasting your life. Come find me. Novosibirsk Oblast, Russia, number 561, Building 106, 24th Street. BL is the abbreviation of ball lightning. Listen, the sound of pine waves, Lin Yun said excitedly, but I didn't have the mood and just wrapped my coat tightly. In the flying snow and fog, the distant mountain peaks were only vague shadows. The flight flew from Moscow for 4 hours and landed at Novosibirsk Airport. The sense of strangeness in my heart was even deeper than when I landed at Moscow Airport a week ago. Only when I thought that this place was closer to China did I feel a little comforted. After receiving the message, we instinctively felt that there was a lot behind the information, but I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to come to Siberia. A week later, Lin Yun informed me that I would go to Russia with her as a technical advisory group. She told me that the negotiations between China and Russia on assembling Su-30 fighter jets in China had been basically completed. This advisory group went to Russia with a low-level military delegation to finalize some details. I was the only lightning expert in the advisory group. I felt that this was no coincidence, so I asked Lin Yun how she got this opportunity. She said mysteriously, I used a privilege that I had not used before when looking for the mainframe. This time I really had no other choice. I didn't know what privilege she was talking about and didn't ask any further. After arriving in Moscow, I found that I had nothing to do in the activities of the delegation, and so did Lin Yun. We followed the delegation to visit the Suvikov Design Bureau and several assembly plants of the military-industrial complex. One evening in Moscow, Lin Yun asked for leave from the head of the group and went out. She returned to the hotel late at night. I went to her room to see her. She was sitting there alone. Her eyes were red and there were traces of tears on her face. This surprised me because I had the impression that she would not cry. She said nothing and I did not ask. In the 3 days that she was in Moscow, she was in a very low mood. From this incident, I found that Lin Yun's life was far more complicated than I had imagined. When the delegation boarded the plane to return home, we boarded a plane that was flying in the same direction but to a much closer destination. In fact, Moscow is not much closer to Siberia than Beijing. We found a car at the airport to go to Novosibirsk City. The driver told us that we had to go 60 kilometers. On both sides of the snow-covered road, there was endless snow fog and black jungle. Lin Yun could speak Russian, not fluently, and she and the driver seemed to get along well. The driver turned his head and looked at me, who was shivering with cold. He seemed to sympathize with me for not being able to join their conversation, and suddenly switched to fluent English and continued to talk to Lin Yun. The Science City originated from a romantic idea in the late 1950s. This idea was full of the simplicity and naivety of the time, an idealism of creating a new world. In fact, it was not as successful as you have heard. It was far away from the metropolis, and the transportation difficulties limited the radiation of science and technology. It fought in vain with the metropolis, and finally had to watch the scientific research talents move to larger and more ideal cities. You don't look like a taxi driver, I commented. Lin Yun introduced. This gentleman is a researcher at the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. What did you say your major is? I am engaged in the research of comprehensive resource planning for undeveloped areas in the Far East, a subject that no one needs in this era of quick success and instant benefits. You lost your job? Not yet. Today is Sunday. I have earned more in these 2 days than in a whole week. The car drove into the Science City. Buildings from the 1950s and 1960s passed by in the snow and fog. Once, I was sure I saw a statue of Lenin. This is a city that makes people feel nostalgic. Those ancient cities with thousands of years of history cannot make people feel this way. They are too old, so old that they have nothing to do with you, and make people lose their feelings. But a young city like this reminds you of an era that has just passed, in which you spent your childhood and youth. That was your own ancient times, your own BC. The car stopped in front of a 5-story building. This might be a residential area, as the rows of buildings looked exactly the same. As the driver left, he said something intriguing to us from the car window. This is the cheapest place to live in the city, but it's not populated by the cheapest people. After we entered, it was very dark inside. This was a high-ceilinged residential building from the 1950s. There were posters of local elections from various political parties on the walls of the lobby. We could only grope our way forward. We used the light of the lighter to identify the house number and went up to the 5th floor. When we passed the stairs, I was holding up the already hot lighter and was about to look for number 561 when I heard a deep male voice shouting in English from somewhere. "Is that you? Are you here for BL?" The third door on the left. We pushed the door open and walked in. The room gave us two contradictory feelings. First, it was very dark, and then the light on the ceiling was very dazzling. There was a strong smell of alcohol in the room. There were books piled everywhere, which seemed a bit messy, but not out of control. A computer screen flashed and then went out. A tall man stood up from the computer. He had a long beard, a pale face, and looked to be in his 50s. After living here for a long time, I know strangers are coming when I hear the sound of footsteps on the stairs. And you are the only strangers who can come here. I believe you will come. He looked at us and said, "You are very young, just like me when I first started this miserable life." Chinese? We nodded. My father went to China in the 1950s. As a hydropower engineer, he helped you build the Sanmingxia hydropower station. I heard that he was more of a hindrance than a help. Lin Yun thought for a moment and said, "It seems that you didn't take into account the siltation of the Yellow River, so the dam will cause floods upstream, and you still don't dare to store water." Ah, another failure. All we have left of that romantic era is failure. Alexander Gmov. He introduced himself, and we did the same. He looked at us again, this time with a more meaningful look, and then said to himself, "You are very young, and you are still worth saving." Lin Yun and I looked at each other in surprise, and then tried to guess what he meant by that. Gmov put a large bottle of wine and a glass on the table, and then rummaged around. I noticed that there were empty bottles of wine on both sides of the computer. Lin Yun and I took the opportunity to look around the room again. Now I understand why I had such a contradictory feeling when I first came here. The walls of this room are all covered with black paper, just like a dark room. The water seeping from the walls that have been in disrepair for a long time has soaked the color, leaving many white lines and white spots on the black walls. I found it. Darn it. I don't have many visitors. Gmov put 2 more empty glasses on the table and then filled 3 glasses with alcohol. It was the kind of homemade vodka, which was white and turbid. It was a large glass cup for drinking tea. I declared that I couldn't drink so much. "Then let this girl drink it for you," Gmov said coldly. Then he drank his glass and refilled it. Lin Yun didn't refuse. To my astonishment, he finished the whole cup. He then reached out to take my cup and drank half of it. "You know what we here for," I said to Gmov. Gmov didn't say anything, just poured wine for himself and Lin Yun. They drank one after another, without saying anything for a long time. I looked at Lin Yun, wanting her to say something, but she seemed to have caught Gmov's addiction to alcohol, and drank half a cup in one go, then stared straight ahead. I got anxious and tapped the table with an empty cup. She looked at me, then tilted her head and gestured to the wall next to her. I noticed the strange black wall again, and found some blurry images on the black paper. I looked closer and found that they were all scenes on the earth, buildings, trees, etc., which seemed to be taken at night. They were all blurry, and most of them were black silhouettes. Looking at the white spots and lines again, my blood froze. In this large room, all the walls, including the ceiling, are covered with countless black and white photos of ball lightning. The photos were of varying sizes, but most were only about 3 inches, so the number was beyond my imagination. I looked through them one by one, and none of them were repeated. "Look there," Gmove said, pointing in the direction of the door. We looked up and saw a large photo on the door we had just entered. It seemed to be a sunrise picture. The sun had just risen above the horizon, and there was a silhouette of the jungle in the white ball of light. This was taken in Congo in 1975. Its diameter, Gmove drank another glass of wine, is 105 meters. After the explosion, 2 hectares of forest were burned to ashes and a small lake was boiled. What's even more strange is that this super ball lightning appeared on a sunny day. I took a cup from Lin Yun, poured myself a glass and drank it, letting the madness spin. Like her, I didn't want to talk, trying to calm the shock and thoughts. I turned my attention to the piles of books and reached for the nearest one. This time I was disappointed. I didn't understand Russian very well, but I knew what it was from the picture of the author with a world map above his head on the title page. Lin Yun took the book and took a look at it, then put it back. "New thinking," she said. I understood why I didn't think it was too messy when I first came in. The books in this pile were beautifully framed and all the same. They were all new thinking. "I had all the material you want," said Gmove. "This house couldn't hold it all, but I burned it all 10 years ago. Then I bought this book in bulk. I'm going to live on it." We looked at him in confusion. Gmove picked up a book. "Look at its cover. The words are all gold-plated, and the gold powder can be washed off with acid. You can buy a lot of these books at wholesale prices, because if you can't sell them, you can return them to the publishing bookstore. Just use fake gold powder to draw the words on the cover, but later they didn't draw them, and they didn't notice it. This job is very profitable. My only complaint about the author is why the title of the book is not longer, such as New Thoughts on the Possibility of the Union of Soviet Socialist Party to establish a new democratic system and integrate into democratic society and become its close member. But the money didn't last long. The red flag fell from the spire, and the gold on the book cover was gone, and then the book was gone. These are the last batch I bought. They have been in the basement for 10 years. Now the price of firewood has risen, and I thought it would be nice to use it to burn in the fireplace. Ah, really, when guests come, the fireplace should be lit." He picked up a book, lit it with a lighter, and stared at it for a while. "The paper is so good that it won't turn yellow in 10 years. Maybe it's made of Siberian birch." After saying that, he threw it into the stove, and then threw in 2 more. The fire burned vigorously, and the red light danced on the countless photos of ball lightning, and the cold room became a little warmer. Gmove stared at the flames and chatted with us for a while. He briefly asked about our situation, but did not mention ball lightning at all. Finally, he picked up an old-fashioned phone, dialed a number, said something briefly, stood up and said to us, "Let's go." The 3 of us went downstairs and walked out into the cold snow. A jeep stopped in front of us, and Gmove asked us to get in. The driver was about the same age as Gmove, but he was very sturdy, like an old sailor. Gmove introduced him. "This is Uncle Levelenko, a fur trader. We need to use his vehicle." The jeep drove along the street. There were few cars on the road. It didn't take long for us to drive out of the city and out onto the vast snowfield. The car turned onto a bumpy road and drove for another hour or so. A warehouse-like building appeared in the vast snow fog ahead. The car stopped in front of the gate. Levelenko pushed the gate open with a rumble. We walked in and saw a large pile of animal fur on both sides of the warehouse, emitting a pungent smell. In the middle was an open space, where an airplane was parked. It was an old-fashioned biplane, with a dilapidated fuselage and cracked aluminum skins in some places. Levelenko said a few words in Russian, and Lin Yun translated. It used to be used to spread pesticides in the forest. I bought it when the forest farm was privatized. This old guy is a little worn out on the outside, but it's still very durable. Let's unload the stuff inside first. So we carried out bundles of furs from the small cabin. I didn't know what animal skins they were, but I could tell they were all good stuff. When all the goods were unloaded, Levelenko poured a small pool of oil under the fuselage and set it on fire. Gmove explained that it was too cold and the engine pipes were frozen, so they had to be heated before they could start. When the fire was burning, Levelenko took out a bottle of vodka, and the 4 of us took turns to drink from the bottle. I just took 2 sips and sat on the ground and couldn't get up. Lin Yun continued to drink with them. I was really impressed by her alcohol tolerance. When the bottle of wine was empty, Levelenko waved his hand to indicate that we could leave, and then jumped into the cockpit with agility that was not commensurate with his age. He had not shown such agility just now. Strong liquor was like lubricating oil for these Siberians. The three of us squeezed into the cabin through the small door in the middle of the fuselage. Gmov took out 3 heavy fur coats from somewhere and handed them to us. Put them on, otherwise you will freeze to death. The plane's engine roared hoarsely, the propeller began to turn, and the biplane slowly moved out of the warehouse and into the snow. Levelenko jumped out of the cockpit, went back to lock the door, and then came back to control the plane to accelerate on the snowfield. But not long after going, the engine sound stopped, and only the sound of snowflakes hitting the porthole glass could be heard outside. Levelenko cursed something, climbed up and down and fiddled with it for a long time before restarting the engine. When the plane was taxiing again, I asked Levelenko from behind the driver's seat, "What if the engine stops in the air?" After listening to Lin Yun's translation, he shrugged disapprovingly. Falling down. Levelenko said a few more words, and Lin Yun translated. In Siberia, everything is not necessarily 100% safe. Sometimes you fly to the end, but find that it is better to fall in the middle. Dr. Gemov has experienced this in his life, right, Doctor? Okay, Captain, fly your plane, said Gmov, and it was obvious that the words hit him sore. Were you an Air Force pilot before? Lin Yun asked Levelenko. Of course not. I was just the last captain of the guard company at that base. Our bodies sank, and we saw the snowfield retreating from the porthole. The plane took off. At this time, in addition to the sound of the engine, the sound of snowflakes hitting the fuselage also increased sharply, as if the plane was flying through a heavy rain. The airflow blew away the circle of snow that had just fallen on the porthole. Looking out the window, the vast forest in the snow and fog slowly moved under the fuselage. From time to time, I could see frozen lakes, which appeared as round spots in the black forest. It reminded me of the photos I saw on the wall of Gmov's room. Looking at the land of Siberia, I was filled with emotion. I would never have dreamed that ball lightning could bring me here. Siberia, suffering, romance, ideals, dedication. Lin Yun leaned his head against the porthole, looked emotionally at the foreign land below, and murmured, "You were talking about the Siberia of the past and the novel," said Gmov. "Now there is only loss and greed, and in this land below, there is uncontrolled logging and hunting, and black crude oil leaking from the oil fields is flowing everywhere." Chinese, Levelenko said from the front seat. There are quite a few Chinese here, too. They trade our furs and timber for alcohol that can blind people, and the down jackets they sell are stuffed with chicken feathers. But I still trust Dr. Gemov's friends. We were all silent. The plane rose and fell like a small leaf in the strong wind. We wrapped our coats tightly and endured the torture of the cold. The flight lasted about 20 minutes, and then the plane began to descend. I saw a large clearing in the woods below, and the plane finally landed in this clearing. Before getting off the plane, Gmov said, "Leave your coat behind, you won't need it." We found it incomprehensible. As soon as the cabin door was opened, a strong chill rushed in, and the world outside with cold wind and snow was even more daunting. Levelenko stayed on the plane to wait for us. Gmov walked straight after getting off the plane, but I knew from the feeling of my feet that we were walking along a railway track. Not far ahead, there was a tunnel entrance exposed on the ground, but from here we could see that it was blocked by a concrete wall. We entered a small section in front of the concrete wall, and finally avoided some of the cold wind temporarily. Gmov used his hands to dig through the snow and moved a large rock protruding from the snow. We saw the black hole with a diameter of about 1 meter exposed. Gmov said, "This is a branch tunnel I dug. It is more than 10 meters long and bypasses the concrete wall." He took out 3 large rechargeable flashlights from a bag, handed one to each of us, took one himself, motioned for us to follow him, and then went into the cave. I followed closely behind Gmov, with Lin Yun at the end. We almost crawled forward in this low cave. In this narrow space, I felt a claustrophobic fear, which gradually increased as we went deeper into the cave. But Gmov suddenly stood up, and I stood up too. In the light of the flashlight, I saw a spacious tunnel in front of us. The tunnel formed a gentle slope leading deep underground. Just now, I felt the rails running along the tunnel in the dark. I used the flashlight to shine on the wall of the tunnel and found that there were many nails and iron rings for tying on the smooth cement wall. It turned out that there were obviously many cables. We walked down the tunnel. As the depth increased, the feeling of cold gradually disappeared. Later, I smelled the smell of dampness and heard the sound of dripping water. The temperature here was above freezing. The space in front of me suddenly expanded, and the beam of light from my flashlight lost its target, as if it had come out of the tunnel into the dark night sky. But if you look closely, you can still see the circle of light from the flashlight at a high altitude, but the cave ceiling is very high, so the circle of light becomes very large and dark, and it is not very clear. Each of our footsteps caused more than one echo, and I really couldn't grasp how big this underground cave hall was. Gmove stopped, lit a cigarette, and began to tell us. More than 40 years ago, I received my doctorate in physics from Moscow State University. I still remember clearly that day when I watched Gagarin, who had just returned from space, riding in an open jeep across Red Square along with tens of thousands of people. He waved flowers and his chest was covered with medals. At that time, my blood was boiling, and with the desire to create a great achievement in a brand new world, I took the initiative to ask to go to the Siberian branch of the USSR Academy of Sciences, which was being established. After I arrived there, I told my leader that I wanted to do something completely groundbreaking without any foundation, and I didn't care how hard it was. He said that was great, and that I should join Project 3141. Later I learned that the code name was randomly chosen by the planners using the value of pi. It had been several days since I met the person in charge of the project, but I still didn't know what the project was about. The person in charge of the project was academician Nikolai Narnov, a very rare person. Even at that time, he was one of those people who were abnormally fanatical in politics. He secretly read Trotsky's works and was fascinated by the idea of global revolution. When I asked him about the content of Project 3141, he said this, "Comrade Gemov, I know that the recent achievements in spaceflight are very inspiring to you, but what does that mean? Gagarin in orbit cannot throw a stone on the heads of those capitalists on Wall Street. Our project is different. If we succeed, all the tanks of imperialism will become toys, their fleets will be as fragile as butterflies, and their fleets will be as vulnerable as a pile of cardboard boxes floating on the water." Later I came here. I was one of the first to arrive. The scene here was the same as what you saw on the ground just now. It was snowing heavily that day. This piece of land had just been cleared, and there were still tree stumps left on the ground. I won't go into detail about what happened next. Even if I had the time, I doubt whether I could bear it mentally. You just need to know that the place where we are is the world's largest ball lightning research base. The research on ball lightning lasted for nearly 30 years. At the peak, there were more than 5,000 people working here. The best physicists and mathematicians in the Soviet Union were more or less involved in this research. To illustrate how much investment has been made in this research, I will just give you an example. Yugmov shone the flashlight backwards, and we saw that next to the tunnel we had just passed, there was another tall tunnel entrance. This tunnel leads to a distance of 20 kilometers. At that time, in order to keep it secret, all the materials transported to the base were unloaded there and then transported in through this tunnel. This caused a large amount of materials to disappear there for no reason. In order to avoid the attention and suspicion of spy satellites, a small city was built there. Also, for the sake of secrecy, that city could not be inhabited. It was just a useless empty city. In order to hide the radiation generated by artificial lightning in the research, the entire base was built underground. We are in a medium-sized experimental city, and the rest of the base has been blocked or blown up and is now inaccessible. The world's largest lightning simulation system, complex magnetic field generators, giant aviation wind tunnels, and other large-scale experimental equipment were once installed here to simulate the environment for ball lightning generation from all angles to the greatest extent possible. Look at this, we came to a tall trapezoidal concrete platform. Can you imagine a platinum electrode several stories high? It was installed on this platform at the time. He bent down and picked up something from the ground. I took it. It was heavy, a metal ball. "It looks like the iron ball in a ball mill," I said. Gmove shook his head. When we were conducting a lightning simulation experiment, some metal components on the top of the cave were melted by lightning, and this thing formed after dripping down and cooling. I used a flashlight to shine on the ground around me and found many of these small metal orbs. In the central laboratory, the lightning intensity generated by the giant lightning simulator is an order of magnitude greater than that of natural lightning in nature, so that after the NATO nuclear monitoring system detected the shock wave, it believed that it was an underground nuclear test. The Soviet government admitted their statement and suffered a lot in the nuclear disarmament negotiations. When this lightning test is carried out, the ground shakes and the ozone generated by the lightning underground is discharged to the ground, making the air within a radius of 100 kilometers have an unusually fresh smell. While conducting lightning simulations, magnetic field generation equipment, microwave laser devices, and large wind tunnels are also turned on to simulate lightning under various conditions, and the results are then input into the giant computer system for analysis. The various parameters of some experiments have far exceeded the limit conditions of natural lightning. Super-intensity lightning is placed in a maze-like complex magnetic field, or in microwave radiation that can boil a small lake in a short time. In the past 30 years, the experimental research here has never been interrupted. I looked up at the trapezoidal platform where the giant electrode was placed. It was set against a dark background and was visible in the 3 beams of light from our flashlights. It looked like an Aztec altar in the jungle. It was sacred. We, the poor seekers of ball lightning, were like pilgrims who had come to the highest temple, filled with fear and awe. I looked at the cement pyramid and wondered how many people like us had been sacrificed on it in the past 30 years. What's the result? I finally asked the most fatal question. Gmove took out another cigarette, lit it, and took a deep puff without saying anything. I couldn't see his expression in the flashlight, but he reminded me of Zhang Bin, and the way he described his pain, which was unspeakable for a ball lightning researcher. So I spoke for Gmove. It never worked, did it? But I immediately found out that I was wrong. Gmove smiled and said, "Young man, you think things are too simple. Sherlock Holmes once said that a case is not afraid of being bizarre but being dull. A dull case is the most difficult to solve. If there is no success in 30 years of research, then it is too bizarre. This bizarreness will inspire people to continue. Sadly, now even this bizarreness is gone. Only the dullness that makes people discouraged. We have succeeded. In 30 years, we have successfully produced 27 ball lightnings." Lin Yun and I were shocked again, stunned and speechless for a moment. Gmove smiled again. "I can imagine the different feelings of both of you at this moment. The major must be happy, because the military only cares about the possibility of turning this thing into a weapon. And you, on the other hand, are sad, just like Skoda when he saw the Norwegian flag left by Amundsen when he reached the South Pole. But these feelings of yours are unnecessary. Ball lightning is still a mystery. We know as much about it now as we did when we first came here more than 30 years ago. We really haven't gained anything. How do you understand this?" Lin Yun asked in surprise. Gmove slowly exhaled a puff of smoke, squinted at the intricately changing smoke in the beam of light, and immersed himself in memories of the past. The first successful ball lightning was produced in 1962, 3 years after the research began. I saw it with my own eyes. After a discharge from the lightning simulator, it appeared in mid-air. It was pale yellow and dragged a light tail as it flew. After about 20 seconds, it disappeared silently in the air. Lin Yun said, "I can imagine how excited you were at that time." Gmove shook his head. "You were wrong again. At that time, ball lightning was just an ordinary electromagnetic phenomenon in our eyes. Project 3141 was not originally intended to be large-scale. At that time, from the highest leaders of the Academy of Sciences and the Red Army to the scientists and engineers participating in the project, everyone believed that for a country that had already sent people into space, as long as it concentrated its scientific research efforts, it was only a matter of time before artificial ball lightning could be generated. In fact, the fact that the research took 3 years to produce results was beyond the expectations of most people. When the ball lightning appeared, we just felt relieved. No one thought that there were still 27 long years and final failure waiting for us. Our confidence seemed to be well-founded at the time. Unlike natural lightning, the conditions and parameters of this lightning were recorded in detail. I can still write down all the parameters exactly. The lightning current was 12,000 amperes, the voltage was 80 million volts, and the discharge time was 119 microseconds. In short, it was a very ordinary lightning. During the discharge, there was an airflow of 2.4 meters per second, microwaves with a power of 550 watts, and an external magnetic field. There were also a lot of other parameters, some of which were ordinary, such as air temperature, pressure, and temperature, and some special ones were the lightning path photographed with ultra-high-speed photography, as well as the intensity and shape of the magnetic field on the spot recorded by various instruments, radial indicators, etc. I remember that all the records at the time were as thick as War and Peace and were top secret. It was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember Narnov holding that large bag of information and saying, "It's okay for us to withdraw the missiles. There are more things that can make the Empire pay attention to and tremble." At that time, we all thought that as long as we repeat the lightning according to these parameters in the future, we can mass-produce ball lightning. No? I asked. I told you that you thought too simply. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. Repeated experiments with the same parameters produced nothing. Furious, Narnov kept the experiment going. In the following year, he strictly followed the recorded parameters and produced 50,000 such lightning strikes, but still did not see any trace of ball lightning. It should be noted that in the Soviet scientific community at that time, determinism and mechanism were the overriding way of thinking. Researchers believed that nature was dominated by ironclad cause and effect. This way of thinking was determined by the political environment. At that time, Lysenko was still haunting the academic community. If you deviate from the mainstream thinking in academia, although it would not be as dangerous as before, it would at least ruin your academic life. After all, there were only a few people like Gaimov who dared to be heretical. This was the case in the field of basic science and pure theoretical research. Ball lightning research was positioned as an application project at that time, and traditional linear thinking dominated people's minds. Such experimental results were unacceptable to them. They believed that as long as one experiment could produce ball lightning, experiments with the same parameters in the future would also be able to produce it. So Narnov gave a self-evident explanation for the results of these 50,000 experiments. The parameters of the first experiment that produced ball lightning were recorded incorrectly. This matter was not a big deal and could be resolved within the scope of work. If anyone was punished for it, it would be for dereliction of duty at most. But Narnov was used to politicizing everything, and this matter gave him an opportunity to exclude dissidents. In his report to the top leadership, he made alarmist statements, saying that there were imperialist spies sabotaging the 3141 project. Since 3141 was a key national weapons development project, this matter quickly attracted attention and a large-scale investigation began. The investigation team was mainly composed of GRU personnel, and Narnov was also one of its main members. For the failure of the subsequent experiments, he proposed a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde conjecture, which came from the novel Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The protagonist of the novel prepared a drug that can cause people to have split personality, but the drug he prepared again with the same formula did not work. So he thought that the ingredients of the newly bought raw materials were not pure, but later he learned that the raw materials he used in the successful preparation were impure, and it was the impurities in them that made him successful. Narnov believed that the saboteur caused the system to deviate from the predetermined parameters in the first experiment, but the deviated parameters produced ball lightning. But this deviated parameter was of course not recorded, and the predetermined parameters were recorded. Although this explanation was bizarre, it was the only one that could be accepted by the investigation team at the time. The next question was which parameters had deviations. The experiment at that time consisted of 4 subsystems, namely the lightning simulation system, the external magnetic field system, the microwave maser system, and the aerodynamic system. The personnel composition of each system was relatively independent, and it was unlikely that the saboteur would infiltrate at the same time. So the deviation of one of the system parameters was considered first. At that time, the consensus was that the most critical parameter was the discharge parameter of the lightning simulation system, and I was the person responsible for the design and operation of this system. This was no longer the era of anti-counter-revolution before the war. One could not be convicted based on groundless speculation. However, at this time, My father defected to West Germany while attending an academic conference in East Germany. My father was a biologist and a persistent geneticist. However, in the Soviet Union at that time, genetic theory was still in a state of treason. His academic views were suppressed, and he fell into a deep depression. I think this was the main reason for his defection. The consequences of his action were disastrous for me. The investigation focused on me. In order to protect themselves, some people in the group I led framed me in every possible way according to Narnov's instructions, and finally I was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 20 years in prison. But Narnov couldn't do without me technically, so he suggested to the higher-ups that I should return to the base to continue my original work during my sentence. After returning to the base, I lived a life inferior to others, without personal freedom, and my range of activities could only be within the base. Even the color of my work clothes was different from others. The most uncomfortable thing was loneliness. Except at work, no one was willing to contact me. Only the female college student who had just been assigned to the group treated me equally and gave me a lot of warmth. Later, she became my flag. As an escape, I put all my heart and soul into research. My hatred for Narnov is hard to express in words, but strangely enough, I basically agree with his Dr. Jekyll and Hyde conjecture, except that I don't believe in deliberate sabotage. I really think that the unknown parameter deviation led to the success of the experiment. This makes me frustrated, because if the deviation parameters are finally found, it will only make it more difficult for me to prove my innocence. But I didn't think about these things at all in my work and tried my best, hoping to successfully produce ball lightning again. The research route after this was very clear. The deviation of the parameters could not be too large, otherwise various monitoring instruments and even the naked eye would notice it during the discharge. Therefore, during the experiment, each parameter should be allowed to fluctuate slightly above and below the recorded value. If the situation of multiple parameters deviating at the same time is taken into account, this is a huge combination and a large number of experiments must be carried out. In this process, I was more certain that Narnov was deliberately framing me, because if he believed that I was the one who caused the sabotage, he would naturally try to make me say which parameters were deviated, but he never asked me once. The others, who were exhausted by the endless and heavy experimental tasks, were full of hatred for me. But at this time, including me, believed that it was only a matter of time before we could successfully produce ball lightning again. Of the matter was once again beyond everyone's expectations. After all possible parameter deviations were tested, there was still no success, which unexpectedly proved my innocence. At that time, Brezhnev came to power. Compared with his predecessor who was born as a pig herder, he liked to be pretentious and was much gentler to the intellectual world. My case was re-examined. Although I was not acquitted, I was released early and was given an opportunity to return to Moscow University to teach. This is an opportunity that people working in this remote base desire, but I stayed. Ball lightning has become a part of my life, and I can't leave it. Now Narnov was the one who was in trouble. He was responsible for the failure of the research. Although it was not as bad as mine, his academic and political career was over. He struggled for a while and insisted on his Dr. Jekyll and Hyde conjecture. What was different from the previous one was that he believed that the deviation parameters might be in the other three systems, so he started a large number of experiments again. This experimental plan was even larger. If it was not interrupted by an unexpected discovery, it would have lasted for who knows how long. 3141 Base has the world's largest lightning simulation system. While conducting ball lightning research, it also conducts some other military or civilian experimental research projects. In an experiment for a lightning protection project, ball lightning was unexpectedly produced again. The parameters of this lightning are far different from those of our first successful experiment, and there is nothing in common. As for various external factors, such as magnetic fields and microwave masers, there are none in this experiment. It is just pure lightning. Thus began a new round of nightmare cycle. The experiment was repeated tens of thousands of times under the same parameters, and the result was the same as the first time. Ball lightning never appeared again. This time there could be no saboteurs to deviate the parameters, and even Narnov admitted that his Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde conjecture was wrong. He was transferred back to the Siberian branch and served in an insignificant administrative position until his retirement. At this time, Project 3141 had been going on for 15 years. After Narnov left, the base changed the direction of the test and began to test various combinations of parameters. In the following 10 years, another 9 ball lightnings were produced. Each one required at least 7,000 lightning strikes and up to hundreds of thousands of lightning strikes. The test parameters were different each time, and most of them were very different. 1980s, stimulated by the U.S. Star Wars program, the Soviet Union also increased its investment in high-tech and new concept weapons, including the research on ball lightning. The scale of the base expanded dramatically, and the number of experiments increased exponentially. The purpose was to find out the law of the conditions for producing ball lightning from a large number of experiments. In the last 5 years, a total of 16 ball lightnings were produced, but as before, we could not find any law for the conditions for producing it. Gmov led us closer to the terrace, shone a flashlight on it and said, "I think of it as a monument. When I'm tormented by memories of the past, I come here to carve something." I looked at this side of the terrace, and in the circle of light of the flashlight, I saw many curved lines, like a group of swimming snakes. During these 30 years of experiments, a total of 27 ball lightnings were produced. This is a curve drawn using the main parameters of those 27 experiments. For example, this one is the current amplitude of the lightning. This one is the strength of the external magnetic field. I carefully examined the curves, which were composed of 27 points. It was as if I was looking at a series of noise records or the painful spasms of a dying creature. There was no pattern at all. We followed Gmov to the other side of the terrace and saw names engraved on it. These are the people who dedicated themselves to Project 3141 over the past 30 years. The harsh working environment took their lives. This is my wife, who died of a strange disease caused by long-term exposure to discharge radiation. Her skin ulcerated, and she died in extreme pain. A considerable number of these people died from this disease. This is my son, who died from the last ball lightning produced by the base. The 27 ball lightning produced in the experiments over the past 30 years killed a total of 3 people. That thing seems to be able to penetrate everything, and no one can predict when and where it will release its energy. However, we do not think that conducting such experiments is a particularly dangerous thing, because the chance of successfully producing it is too small, and people will gradually relax from their high alert, and ball lightning often appears at this time, causing disasters. When the last ball lightning appeared, the people at the test site were safe and sound, but it penetrated the thick rock and burned my son, who was in the central control room. He was a computer engineer working at the base at the time. Gmov turned off the flashlight, turned around and faced the vast dark space in the cave hall, and let out a long breath. When I walked into the control center, I saw that it was still as quiet as usual. Under the soft light of the ceiling lamp, everything was so bright and clean. All the computer equipment was running normally and silently. However, in the middle of the white anti-static floor, my son's almost completely burned remains were spread out, as if it was a phantom projected from somewhere. At that moment, I gave up. In the face of this natural or supernatural force, after 30 years of struggle, I completely gave up. My life ended at that moment, and I was just living. When we returned to the ground, the snow had stopped, and the setting sun was above the treetops in the west, dyeing the snow blood red. I walked towards the plain with heavy steps, and I felt that my life was over. Returning to Gmov's residence, the 3 of us drank without restraint all night. The Siberian wind howled outside the window, and the new thoughts burned one by one in the fireplace. Countless ball lightning on the walls and ceiling spun around me, spinning faster and faster, as if I was trapped in a vortex of a white ball of light. Said drunkenly, "Kids, find something else to do. There are many interesting things in the world. Life is only once. Don't waste it on illusory things." Later I fell asleep among the pile of books. In my dream, I returned to the night of my 14th birthday. In that small house in the thunderstorm, I was alone facing a birthday cake with candles on it. There was no father, no mother, and no ball lightning. My dream about them had ended. The next morning, Gmov sent us to the airport. Before we parted, Linyan said, "I know you told us a lot of things that you shouldn't have said, but please rest assured, we guarantee with our integrity that we will never tell anyone about it." Gmov raised a hand towards Lin Yun. No, Major. The reason I asked you to come here is to make all this public. I want people to know that in that sad era of idealism, a group of Communist Youth League members came to the depths of the dense forests of Siberia, chasing a ghost there and dedicating their lives to it. We hugged each other tightly, tears streaming down our faces. After the plane took off, I closed my eyes tiredly and leaned back on my seat. My mind was blank. A passenger sitting next to me poked me and asked, "Chinese?" After I nodded, he pointed to the TV in front of the seat, as if he was surprised that I, as a Chinese, didn't watch TV. The news was being broadcast on TV. The situation was getting tense again, and the clouds of war were getting thicker and thicker. I was too tired, and my numb heart no longer cared about anything, including the situation and the war. I turned around and looked at Lin Yun. She was watching TV intently. I envied her very much. Ball lightning was only a part of her life for a period of time, and losing it would not be a fatal blow to her. I fell asleep in a short while, and when I woke up, the plane was about to land. Spring breeze in Beijing in the evening was intoxicatingly warm, and the shadow of war could not be seen for a while. Siberia in the ice and snow was now an extremely distant world for me, as if it had only existed in dreams. In fact, it now seemed that all my previous life was also a dream, and now I was awake. On the Chang'an Avenue, where the lights were just coming on, Lin Yun and I looked at each other in silence. We were not originally from the same road. Our respective worlds were so far apart. It was the ball lightning that connected us together. Now, this bond no longer exists. Zhang Bin, Zhang Min, Jimov. There were already enough people dismembered on that altar. Adding me alone would not make much sense. I felt that the extinguished fire of hope in my heart was poured with cold water again. Now there was only ashes soaked in ice water. Goodbye, beautiful Major. Don't give up. Lin Yun looked at me and said, "Lin Yun, I am immortal." Me too, but don't give up. Goodbye. I held out my hand to her, and in the light of the street lamp, I saw tears flashing in her eyes. I made up my mind to let go of her warm and soft hand, turned around and walked away without looking back.